What happens when a single father with barely enough money to fix his broken-down house catches the attention of a CEO worth millions? When Victoria Hale knocked on Daniel Carter's door that rainy November night, neither of them knew that three simple words, "I need help," would destroy her carefully planned engagement, divide her powerful family, and force them both to choose between the life everyone expected and the one no one saw coming. This is their story. If you want to see how a chance meeting between neighbors turned into the scandal that shook Charleston's elite, stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. Daniel Carter had exactly $473 in his checking account when he signed the papers on the house at 847 Magnolia Street. His lawyer, a kind-faced woman who'd worked with him pro bono, had asked him 3 times if he was absolutely certain about this decision. "It needs a lot of work, Daniel," she'd said, sliding the inspection report across the scarred conference table. "The roof leaks. The electrical system is from 1987. The kitchen plumbing is basically held together with prayers and duct tape." Daniel had smiled that quiet, stubborn smile that his late wife Sarah used to say meant he'd already made up his mind and nothing short of an earthquake would change it. "I can fix it," he'd said simply. And so here he was, 3 weeks later, standing in what most people would generously call a disaster zone, and what his 7-year-old son Jamie had accurately described as a house that looks like it got in a fight and lost. The living room was a maze of cardboard boxes, most of them still taped shut because Daniel hadn't found the energy, or the time, to unpack. The kitchen sink dripped with a rhythm that had become the house's unofficial soundtrack. Drip, drip, pause, drip. The bedroom Daniel had claimed for himself contained exactly 3 items: a mattress on the floor, a lamp with a broken shade, and a milk crate serving as a nightstand. Jamie's room was the only space Daniel had actually finished. Fresh paint on the walls, a sky blue that Jamie had chosen himself, sturdy shelves holding books and toys, a bed with a real frame and a comforter covered in dinosaurs, a small desk positioned near the window where morning light poured in like liquid gold. Because if Daniel Carter had learned anything in the 2 years since Sarah's death, it was this: you could live in chaos yourself. You could survive on coffee and determination and 3 hours of sleep, but your child's world needed to feel solid. Tonight, Jamie was asleep upstairs, his breathing soft and even, one small hand curled around the stuffed elephant that had been his mother's last gift to him. Daniel stood at the kitchen counter surrounded by renovation plans that looked more like abstract art than actual blueprints, trying to figure out how to replace a load-bearing wall without the entire second floor collapsing. The coffee pot gurgled. Outside, rain began to tap against the windows with gentle insistence. Daniel rubbed his eyes and checked his watch. 10:47 p.m. Tomorrow he had 3 client meetings, a site inspection, and somehow needed to pick Jamie up from school by 3 o'clock. His small architecture firm, Carter and Associates, though the Associates part was aspirational since Daniel was currently the only employee, was finally starting to gain traction. 2 months ago, he'd landed a contract to design a community center. Last week, a developer had called about a residential project. It wasn't much, but it was forward momentum. It was proof that leaving his comfortable corporate position at Whitmore and Sons, packing up everything he and Jamie owned, and moving to Charleston hadn't been complete insanity, even if some days it felt pretty close. The knock, when it came, was so soft that Daniel almost missed it beneath the sound of rain. Tap, tap, tap. He looked up from his plans, frowning. It was nearly 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. He wasn't expecting anyone. The knock came again, slightly louder this time, more insistent. Daniel walked through the narrow hallway, stepping over a toolbox and around a stack of paint cans, and pulled open the front door. The woman standing on his porch looked like she'd walked out of a magazine spread and directly into a rainstorm. Her auburn hair, probably styled perfectly a few hours ago, now hung in wind-tangled waves around her face. She wore an elegant charcoal coat over what looked like an expensive business suit, though the coat was unbuttoned and the suit was rumpled in a way that suggested a very long day. Her heels were designer. Daniel didn't know much about women's fashion, but he knew enough to recognize the red soles that meant serious money. But it was her eyes that caught him. Gray-blue, like a winter sky before snow. Exhausted, uncertain, and trying very hard to hide both. "I'm so sorry to bother you this late," she said, and her voice was refined, educated, the kind of accent that spoke of private schools and expensive universities. "My name is Victoria Hale. I live next door." She gestured vaguely to her left, toward the large colonial-style house that Daniel had noticed when he'd moved in, the kind of place with actual landscaping and a 3-car garage and lights that came on automatically at dusk. "I think I left something here last week, a flashlight. I was helping the previous owner with some paperwork before they moved out, and I must have set it down somewhere." Daniel blinked. "Oh, I just bought the house 3 weeks ago. I haven't come across any flashlights, but honestly, I'm still unpacking most of my stuff, so—" "Of course," Victoria interrupted, already stepping back. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have bothered you so late. It's just a flashlight. I can replace it. I wasn't thinking—" "Would you like to come in and look?" Daniel found himself asking. "I mean, the place is a mess, but if you know where you might have left it, you're welcome to check." Victoria hesitated, one hand already raised in polite refusal, but then something in her expression shifted. Her shoulders dropped slightly, as if she'd been holding them rigid for hours and finally allowed herself to relax. "Actually," she said quietly, "that would be helpful. Thank you." Daniel stepped aside, suddenly acutely aware of the disaster that was his entryway. "Sorry about the, everything. I'm still renovating, or planning to renovate, or thinking about planning to renovate. The process is ongoing." The smallest smile touched Victoria's lips as she stepped inside, carefully navigating around a box labeled "Kitchen, Fragile," in Jamie's careful 7-year-old handwriting. "How long have you lived here?" 3 weeks? Give or take a lifetime." That got a real smile, brief but genuine. "I remember that feeling. When I bought my house, I spent the first month convinced I'd made a terrible mistake." "And after the first month?" "I was certain I'd made a terrible mistake." Daniel laughed, surprised. "But you stayed." "I stayed." Victoria paused in the hallway, looking around with an expression that wasn't quite curiosity and wasn't quite nostalgia, something in between. The previous owners, the Hendersons, they were an elderly couple, sweet people. They'd lived here for 42 years. Mrs. Henderson used to bake cookies and bring them over whenever I was having a particularly bad day. She had this uncanny ability to know exactly when I needed chocolate chips and sympathy. "Sounds like a good neighbor." "The best." Victoria's smile faded slightly. "They moved to Florida to be closer to their daughter. I helped them with some of the paperwork, estate planning, legal documents, that sort of thing. She paused, seeming to reconsider whatever she was about to say. "I work in business management." Daniel nodded, not pressing. "Well, the flashlight. Where do you think you might have left it?" "Probably the kitchen. I was sitting at the table with Mrs. Henderson while we reviewed some documents, and I remember the power flickered." They made their way to the kitchen, which looked even worse in the harsh overhead light. The sink was still dripping. Renovation plans covered every available surface. A cold cup of coffee sat next to a calculator, and a very depressing spreadsheet titled Budget versus Reality. Victoria scanned the room with a practiced eye, then crouched down to check under the table. "Not here," she said, straightening up. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have—" She stopped mid-sentence, her gaze landing on the spreadsheet. Even upside down, the numbers were clearly visible, and clearly not encouraging. "You're doing the renovations yourself?" she asked, not quite managing to keep the surprise out of her voice. Daniel felt his face warm. "Most of them, yeah. I'm an architect by trade, so I can handle the design work. And I know enough about construction to do a lot of the basic stuff myself. I've got a contractor friend who helps with the big projects. It's cheaper this way. Cheaper and significantly more time-consuming. Time I have. Money I don't." Victoria nodded slowly, still looking at the spreadsheet. Daniel had the uncomfortable feeling of being X-rayed, assessed, quietly judged by someone who understood numbers far better than he did. "You've got a lot of work ahead of you," she said finally. Daniel laughed, but it came out more tired than amused. "You're not the first person to tell me that. I'm sure I won't be the last." They stood there for a moment in the fluorescent kitchen light, two strangers connected by nothing more than property lines and a missing flashlight. Rain continued to drum against the windows. Somewhere upstairs, a pipe groaned softly. "I should let you get back to your evening," Victoria said, but she didn't move toward the door. Instead, she glanced around the kitchen again, and Daniel saw something flicker across her face. Not pity, exactly, but understanding. Recognition, maybe. The look of someone who knew what it felt like to take on something impossibly large and try to make it work through sheer stubborn will. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said before he could stop himself. Victoria turned back to him, one eyebrow raised slightly. "Of course." "Why did you really come over here tonight?" The question hung in the air between them. For a long moment, Victoria didn't answer. She looked down at her expensive shoes, at the worn linoleum floor, at anywhere but Daniel's face. "The flashlight was real," she said finally. "I did leave it here. But you're right. I could have come by during the day. I could have sent a text or left a note. I didn't need to knock on a stranger's door at 11 o'clock at night." "So why did you?" Victoria met his eyes then, and something in her expression was so raw, so unguarded, that Daniel almost looked away. "Because my house is very quiet," she said softly, "and sometimes quiet feels like drowning." Daniel understood that. He understood it with the kind of bone-deep recognition that comes from living it. "Would you like some coffee?" he asked. "It's terrible coffee. I make it in a French press that I think might be older than me, but it's hot and it's caffeinated." Victoria should have said no, should have thanked him politely, walked back to her quiet house, and maintained the careful distance that neighbors in Charleston's nicer districts always kept. Instead, she said, "I would love some terrible coffee." Victoria Hale left Daniel Carter's house at 1:47 in the morning with no flashlight, 2 cups of terrible coffee warming her system, and the strange, unsettled feeling that something in her carefully controlled life had just shifted by a few crucial degrees. She walked across the wet grass separating their properties, her designer heels sinking slightly into the soft earth, and let herself into her own house. The contrast was immediate and stark. Where Daniel's home was chaos and unfinished potential, Victoria's was pristine, hardwood floors that gleamed even in the darkness. Furniture that had been selected by an interior designer whose rates started at $500 an hour. Art on the walls that was tasteful and expensive and completely impersonal. A kitchen with marble countertops that had never seen a single scratch. A wine fridge stocked with bottles she never drank. And cabinets organized with the kind of precision that suggested they were rarely used. It was beautiful. It was perfect. It was absolutely suffocating. Victoria dropped her coat over a chair, an act of rebellion so small it was almost laughable, and walked to the large windows overlooking her backyard. Rain still fell in steady sheets, turning the carefully manicured lawn into a watercolor painting of grays and blacks. She thought about Daniel Carter, about his renovation spreadsheets and his cold coffee, and the way he'd smiled when she'd admitted that quiet felt like drowning, not with pity, but with understanding. She thought about the small dinosaur nightlight she'd glimpsed in the upstairs hallway, the child's drawing taped to the refrigerator, the evidence of a life being lived, messily and imperfectly, but with purpose. Her phone buzzed, a text from Elliot Grant. "Dinner tomorrow? The usual place. 7 p.m. Victoria stared at the message, didn't respond. Put the phone face down on the counter. She went upstairs to her bedroom, king-sized bed, Egyptian cotton sheets, a view of the Charleston skyline, and lay awake until dawn. The next morning, Daniel woke to Jamie jumping on his mattress with the boundless energy of a child who'd slept soundly and was ready to take on the world. "Dad! Dad! Wake up! It's morning, and I'm hungry, and I think there's a cat in our yard." Daniel groaned, pulling a pillow over his face. "Jamie, buddy, what time is it?" "The clock says 6:30. That's not even a real time." "It is. Look." Daniel opened one eye and saw his son's face approximately 3 inches from his own, grinning with the kind of joy that should be illegal before at least 8 a.m. "Okay," Daniel conceded, sitting up and running a hand through his hair. "Okay, I'm awake. What's this about a cat?" "There's a cat in our yard. An orange one. Can we keep it?" "We can't keep every animal that wanders into our yard, Jamie. We've discussed this." "But this one is different. This one looks nice." "They all look nice until you try to catch them." Jamie's face fell in that dramatic way that only 7-year-olds can manage. Complete devastation over the possibility of not acquiring a stray cat. Daniel felt his resolve waver. They'd had this exact conversation about a possum last month, and a very aggressive crow the month before that. Tell you what, Daniel said, standing up and stretching until his back popped. Let's have breakfast, and if the cat is still there after we eat, we'll talk about it. Deal? Deal! They made their way downstairs, Jamie taking the steps two at a time, Daniel moving considerably slower, and into the kitchen. Daniel started a pot of coffee while Jamie pressed his face against the window, narrating the cat's every movement with the enthusiasm of a nature documentary host. He's walking now. Now he's sitting. Now he's looking at a bird. Dad, why do cats look at birds? Because cats are natural hunters. Does that mean he wants to eat the bird? Probably. That's sad for the bird. That's nature, buddy. Daniel was scrambling eggs, one of exactly 3 meals he could make with any confidence, when he glanced out the window and saw her. Victoria Hale, standing in her own backyard, dressed in running clothes and holding a coffee mug. She was staring at the same orange cat that had captured Jamie's attention, a slight frown on her face. Without thinking, Daniel opened the back door and called out, "He's not yours, is he?" Victoria looked up, startled, and for a moment Daniel thought she might pretend she hadn't heard him. But then she walked over to the fence separating their properties, shaking her head. "No, he's been hanging around for a few days. I think he's a stray." "Dad!" Jamie appeared at Daniel's elbow, eyes wide. "Is that the lady? The one who came over last night?" Daniel winced. Jamie, inside voice. But Victoria was already smiling, and it transformed her entire face. "Hello," she said, crouching down so she was eye level with Jamie. "You must be Daniel's son." "I'm Jamie. I'm 7. Do you want to help us catch the cat?" "Jamie," Daniel started, but Victoria interrupted. "What kind of cat is it?" "Orange and fluffy, and he looks nice." "Oh, those are all excellent qualities in a cat," Jamie beamed. "That's what I said." Victoria stood up, meeting Daniel's eyes over Jamie's head. There was something different about her this morning. She looked more relaxed, less guarded. The professional armor she'd worn last night had been replaced by simple running clothes and bare feet in the grass. "I should warn you," Victoria said. "I tried to catch him yesterday. He's fast." "Faster than me?" Jamie asked, already preparing to take this as a personal challenge. "Much faster." "I'm pretty fast." "I'm sure you are." Daniel watched this exchange with growing amusement. "Jamie, your eggs are getting cold. But the cat will still be there after breakfast. Go eat." Jamie sighed with the weight of the world on his small shoulders, but obediently headed back inside. Daniel lingered for a moment, suddenly aware that he was standing in his backyard in sweatpants and an old t-shirt that said, "I'm an architect. I can't fix stupid, but I can design around it." "Thank you for the coffee last night," Victoria said, saving him from his self-consciousness. "It really was terrible." Daniel laughed. "I warned you." "You did. I chose to ignore the warning. That's on me." A moment of comfortable silence. The cat meowed somewhere in the bushes. Rain from the previous night dripped from the leaves overhead. "I should let you get to your breakfast," Victoria said, but she didn't move. "You could join us," Daniel heard himself say. "I'm making scrambled eggs. They're only slightly better than the coffee." Victoria's smile widened. "That's a very compelling offer." "I know how to sell it." She should have said no, should have maintained boundaries, kept distance, protected the careful separation between her professional world and this chaotic, unpredictable man with his broken-down house and his sweet son and his terrible coffee. "I should change first," Victoria said instead. "Give me 10 minutes?" "Take your time. The eggs will be just as mediocre whenever you get here." Victoria Hale had not eaten breakfast with another person in 6 months. This wasn't because she didn't have friends. She had colleagues, professional contacts, people she met for carefully scheduled lunches where they discussed quarterly earnings and market strategies. She had her assistant, Margaret, who sometimes brought her coffee and a muffin when Victoria forgot to eat. She had Elliot, who took her to expensive restaurants and ordered for both of them without asking what she wanted. But actual breakfast, the kind where you sat at a table in the morning light and talked about nothing in particular that she hadn't done since before her father had promoted her to CEO. And her life had become an endless series of meetings, decisions, and carefully managed appearances. So when she walked into Daniel Carter's disaster of a kitchen 17 minutes later, she'd needed the extra 7 minutes to convince herself this wasn't completely insane. Wearing jeans and a simple sweater, she felt something strange and unsettling. She felt nervous. "Sorry about the mess," Daniel said, gesturing vaguely at everything. Actually, no, I'm not sorry. This is just how it is. Take it or leave it. I'll take it, Victoria said, and meant it. Jamie was already at the table, swinging his legs and explaining in great detail his plan for catching the orange cat, which involved a box, some string, and what he called reverse psychology. You see, Jamie said seriously, cats don't like it when you chase them. So if we don't chase him, he'll come to us. That's actually pretty smart, Victoria said, sitting down across from him. Jamie's face lit up. Really? Really? Have you tested this theory? Not yet. Dad says we have to wait. Dads are very big on waiting. The biggest. Daniel brought over plates of eggs, slightly burned toast, and what might have been bacon or might have been a science experiment. Victoria wasn't entirely sure. He set them down with an apologetic smile. This is it. This is the extent of my culinary skills. Victoria took a bite. The eggs were oversalted and underseasoned simultaneously, which she would have thought impossible. The toast was definitely burned. The mysterious meat was, well, it was trying its best. It's perfect, she said, and somehow, in that moment, it was. They ate breakfast while Jamie talked about school. His best friend Marcus had moved away and he was sad about it. His favorite dinosaur, Ankylosaurus, because they have those cool tail clubs. And his theory that their house was probably haunted but in a friendly way. Daniel mostly listened, occasionally redirecting Jamie when he got too off topic, adding details where needed. Victoria watched the easy rhythm between father and son, the comfortable shorthand of people who only had each other and had learned to make that enough. What about you? Jamie asked suddenly, turning his full attention to Victoria. Do you have kids? Jamie, Daniel started, but Victoria waved him off. I don't, she said. It's just me. That must be lonely. The simple, devastating honesty of it hit Victoria like a physical blow. She felt her throat tighten. Sometimes, she admitted. Yes. You could hang out with us, Jamie offered with the casual generosity of childhood. We do fun stuff, sometimes. Jamie, I'm sure Ms. Hale has her own. Victoria, she interrupted. Please, just Victoria. Daniel met her eyes and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. The acknowledgement of two people who were both, in their own ways, rebuilding. Victoria has a very important job, Daniel said gently to Jamie. She's probably very busy. Not too busy for breakfast, Victoria said before she could stop herself. Jamie grinned. See, Dad? She's not too busy. After breakfast, Jamie went upstairs to get ready for school, leaving Daniel and Victoria alone in the kitchen. Daniel started clearing plates, and Victoria automatically stood to help. You don't have to. I want to. They worked in comfortable silence, Daniel washing and Victoria drying with a dish towel that had seen better days. Through the window, they could see the orange cat sunning itself on the fence. He seems nice, Daniel said, nodding toward the cat. Jamie or the cat? Both, actually. Victoria smiled. Jamie is wonderful. You're doing a great job with him. I'm trying. Some days I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water. I think that's just called being a parent. Are you speaking from experience or observation? Observation, and maybe a little projection. Daniel turned off the water, drying his hands on his jeans. Can I ask you something? As long as I can reserve the right not to answer. Fair enough. He leaned against the counter, studying her with that same quiet intensity from last night. Last night you said you work in business management, but that's not quite the whole truth, is it? Victoria felt her defenses start to rise, automatic and well-practiced. But something about the way Daniel asked, curious, not accusatory, made her pause. What makes you say that? The way you looked at my budget spreadsheet. That wasn't casual interest. That was professional assessment. And your shoes last night had red soles, which I'm pretty sure means they cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. And you said you helped the Hendersons with estate planning and legal documents, which sounds more like executive work than general business management. You're observant. I'm an architect. I notice details. Victoria set down the dish towel, considering how much to reveal. The truth was, most people in Charleston knew who she was, or at least knew the Hale name. Her father's company, Hale Industries, had been a fixture in the Charleston business community for 40 years. Her own face had been in the business section of the Post and Courier when she'd been named CEO 2 years ago. But Daniel was new to the city, new enough that he might not know, might not care. "I'm the CEO of Hale Industries," she said finally. "We do manufacturing, primarily defense contracts and industrial equipment. About 3,000 employees. Revenue last year was just under 800 million. Daniel's eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh, yeah, that's significantly more than business management." "It's a business. I manage it. Technically accurate." A smile tugged at Daniel's mouth. "You downplayed it." "I didn't want to." Victoria paused, searching for the right words. "People treat you differently when they know. Everything becomes about the job, the money, the connections. I just wanted to be a neighbor looking for a flashlight." "For what it's worth," Daniel said quietly, "I like the neighbor looking for a flashlight. She made terrible coffee choices and stayed way too late on a work night." "That does sound like poor judgment." "The worst." They smiled at each other, and Victoria felt that shift again, that sense of something changing, something clicking into place. "Dad!" Jamie's voice echoed from upstairs. "I can't find my homework." Daniel sighed. "The eternal struggle. I should—" "Go," Victoria said. "I'll let myself out." She was halfway to the door when Daniel called after her. "Victoria?" She turned back. "Same time tomorrow? For breakfast?" She should have said no. Should have been professional, maintained distance, protected herself from the complication of getting close to someone who lived in a different world, who had a child, who represented everything her careful, controlled life wasn't supposed to include. "I'll bring better coffee," she said instead. Daniel's smile could have lit the entire house. "Deal." The next 3 weeks developed a rhythm that felt both natural and completely unprecedented in Victoria's carefully structured life. She would go for her morning run, 5 miles through the historic district, the same route she'd been running for years. But now she'd time it so she'd finish just as Daniel was starting breakfast. She'd show up at his back door with expensive coffee from the French cafe downtown, and he'd pretend to be offended that she didn't trust his French press. "One day," he'd say, "you're going to admit my coffee isn't that bad." "One day," she'd counter, "you're going to admit that you're making it wrong on purpose just to mess with me." Can't prove anything. Jamie became her unofficial tour guide to all things 7-year-old, explaining the complex social dynamics of second grade, the superiority of Ankylosaurus over all other dinosaurs, and his evolving plan to befriend the orange cat, who they'd started calling Marmalade, despite having no confirmation that the cat would answer to any name. Sometimes Victoria would stay for 20 minutes, just long enough for coffee and conversation. Sometimes she'd still be there an hour later, helping Jamie with his math homework, while Daniel packed lunches and searched for missing shoes, and generally performed the controlled chaos that was getting a child ready for school. Other times, Daniel would appear on her porch in the evening, usually with some practical excuse. "I noticed your gutters are pulling away from the house. There's a tree branch over your roof that's going to be a problem in the next storm. Your front steps are uneven. Someone's going to trip." He'd fix whatever issue he'd identified, refusing payment, accepting only conversation, and occasionally dinner. Victoria learned that Daniel had been married to his high school sweetheart, Sarah, who died of a brain aneurysm 2 years ago. Here one moment, gone the next. No warning, no chance to prepare. That he'd left his corporate job because he couldn't stand the pity in his colleagues' eyes, couldn't bear walking into an office where everyone knew his tragedy. That he'd chosen Charleston because it was far enough from Philadelphia to feel like a fresh start, but close enough to Sarah's parents that Jamie could still see his grandparents regularly. Daniel learned that Victoria had been groomed her entire life to take over Hale Industries, that she'd attended boarding schools and business programs and networking events since she was old enough to shake hands properly. That her father, Charles Hale, had very specific ideas about what her life should look like. That she was good at her job, exceptional even, but sometimes she felt like she was living someone else's life and had forgotten to notice when the switch happened. They didn't talk about the obvious tension building between them, the way their hands would brush when passing coffee cups. The way Daniel's smile changed when he looked at her, something warm and private entering his expression. The way Victoria found herself checking her reflection before their morning coffee, caring about things she hadn't cared about in years. They were careful, cautious. 2 people circling something neither of them was ready to name. And then Elliot Grant's car appeared in Victoria's driveway, and everything changed. Daniel saw the car on a Friday evening. He was in his front yard, attempting to wrestle a particularly stubborn shrub out of the ground when the sleek black Mercedes pulled up to Victoria's house with the quiet purr of German engineering and serious money. The man who stepped out wore a suit that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly income. Tall, polished, with the kind of casual confidence that came from never having to worry about budget spreadsheets or whether you could afford to fix the roof before winter. He walked to Victoria's door like he'd done it 100 times before. Didn't knock, just used a key. Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. Jamie appeared at his elbow, holding the water bottle Daniel had asked for 5 minutes ago. "Who's that?" Jamie asked, watching the stranger disappear into Victoria's house. "I don't know, buddy." But that wasn't quite true. Daniel might not know the man's name, but he recognized the type. Recognized what the expensive car and the casual key holding and the tailored suit meant. This was someone from Victoria's world, her real world. "Can we go inside?" Daniel asked, suddenly very tired. "I think I'm done with the yard for today." That night, Daniel didn't see lights in Victoria's kitchen. Didn't see her appear on her back porch for their unspoken evening check-in where they'd wave or exchange a few words across the fence. The house next door was dark except for the living room, where shadows moved behind drawn curtains. Daniel told himself it was none of his business. Told himself he had no claim on Victoria's time or attention. Told himself that whatever was developing between them was fragile at best, imaginary at worst. He still couldn't sleep. The full truth came from Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who lived 2 houses down and seemed to know everything about everyone in the neighborhood. Daniel was picking up Jamie from the bus stop when Mrs. Chen appeared with her small terrier and her endless supply of information. "I see your neighbor has a gentleman caller," she said without preamble, because Mrs. Chen had never seen the point in small talk when she could get directly to the gossip. "Mrs. Chen, Elliot Grant, old Charleston family. His father owns half the commercial real estate downtown. He and Victoria have been," she paused delicately, "associated for several months now." Daniel felt Jamie's hand slip into his. "Associated?" Her father introduced them. Charles Hale and Richard Grant go back 40 years, same club, same board memberships, same social circle. Everyone expected an engagement announcement last summer, but Victoria kept putting it off. Said she was too busy with the company. Mrs. Chen gave Daniel a knowing look. "But now Elliot's been coming around again 3 times this week." "That's great," Daniel said, trying to sound like he meant it. "I'm happy for her." "Are you?" "Mrs. Chen, that girl has been alone in that house for 2 years, working herself into the ground, trying to prove herself to a father who won't be satisfied until she's exactly the daughter he imagined instead of the person she actually is." Mrs. Chen's voice softened. "She needs someone who sees her, really sees her. I'm sure Mr. Grant, Elliot Grant, sees an asset, a merger, the perfect wife to complete his perfect life." Mrs. Chen looked at Daniel directly. "You see a person." Daniel didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to explain that he saw so much more than a person. He saw someone brilliant and lost and fighting and tired. Someone who made terrible coffee choices and stayed too late and laughed at Jamie's dinosaur jokes like they were the funniest thing she'd ever heard. He saw someone he was dangerously close to falling in love with. "Come on, Jamie," he said quietly. "Let's go home." That evening, Daniel was attempting to install new cabinet hardware in the kitchen when he heard the knock. Not the soft, uncertain knock from that first rainy night. This was firm, official. He opened the door to find Victoria standing there, and his heart sank. She looked like a different person. Her hair was perfectly styled. She wore a dress that probably cost more than his car, pearls that were definitely real, heels that brought her nearly to his height. Her makeup was flawless. She looked like the CEO of an $800 million company. She looked miserable. "I'm sorry," she said without preamble. "I should have told you about Elliot. I should have—" "You don't owe me an explanation." "Yes, I do." "Victoria, please let me say this." She took a breath, her composed professional mask cracking slightly. "Elliot and I have been— my father has been— there's an expectation that we'll—" She stopped, frustrated. "I don't love him. I don't even particularly like him. But everyone in my life has made it very clear that he's the logical choice, the right choice. The choice that makes sense for the company, for the family, For every reason except the one that should actually matter. Daniel leaned against the door frame, something hard and protective closing around his heart. So why are you here? Because I'd rather have terrible coffee with you than champagne with him. The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest and terrifying. Your father knows about me? Daniel asked. No, not yet, but he will. People talk. Charleston is a small city when you're part of certain circles. And what will he say? Victoria's laugh was bitter. He'll say you're not suitable, that you're a single father with a struggling business and a house that's falling apart. He'll say I'm being foolish, throwing away a perfect match for a complication. Is that what I am? A complication? No. Victoria's voice was fierce. You're the first thing I've wanted for myself in 10 years. Daniel's breath caught. He looked at this woman, this brilliant, powerful, impossibly complicated woman, standing on his porch in her expensive dress and real pearls, choosing honesty over comfort. Come inside, he said quietly. Jamie's asleep? Yeah. Victoria stepped into the house, and this time she didn't comment on the mess or the ongoing renovations. She walked straight to the kitchen and sank into one of the mismatched chairs, dropping her head into her hands. Daniel sat across from her. Waited. I told Elliot tonight that I needed space, Victoria said finally. That I wasn't ready to make any decisions about our future. He said he'd wait. That he understood. She looked up, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. He was so patient, so understanding, so absolutely convinced that eventually I'll realize he's right and come around. Will you? 2 months ago I might have. It would have been easier, cleaner, the path of least resistance. Victoria met Daniel's eyes, but then some idiot architect moved in next door with his sweet kid and his terrible coffee and started fixing things around my house without being asked. And suddenly the path of least resistance started feeling like giving up. Victoria, I know this is complicated. I know I come with family drama and corporate politics and more baggage than any sane person should have to deal with. I know you have Jamie to think about, and you don't need someone else's mess landing in your life. You're not a mess. I'm standing in your kitchen at 9 p.m. on a Friday night, crying about my father's expectations while wearing a dress that costs more than your monthly mortgage. I'm absolutely a mess. Daniel couldn't help it. He laughed, and after a moment, Victoria laughed too, wet and shaky, but real. For what it's worth, Daniel said, I think your father is wrong. You're not throwing away a perfect match. You're refusing to settle for something that looks right on paper but feels wrong in every way that matters. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you bring expensive coffee to breakfast because you care more about other people enjoying things than about being right. I know you listen to Jamie's dinosaur facts like they're the most important thing you've heard all day. I know you run 5 miles every morning and never complain, but you hate running. You just like the feeling of finishing. He paused. I know that when you smile, really smile, it's like watching someone remember they're allowed to be happy. Victoria was crying now, actual tears running down her carefully made-up face. I haven't been happy in so long, she whispered. I didn't even realize it until you asked what I wanted, and I couldn't remember the last time anyone had asked me that. Daniel stood up, walked around the table, and held out his hand. Victoria looked at it for a long moment, this simple offering, this uncomplicated gesture, and then she took it. He pulled her up, and she came to him, and they stood in his cluttered kitchen holding each other while the refrigerator hummed and pipes groaned and somewhere outside a dog barked. This is going to be hard, Victoria said against his shoulder. I know. My father is going to hate it. Probably. People are going to talk. Let them. Victoria pulled back slightly, looking up at him. You're very calm about this. I'm terrified, Daniel admitted. You're brilliant and powerful and way out of my league. Your ex-boyfriend/family, approved, suitor probably has a yacht. I have a house held together with determination and duct tape. I don't want a yacht. What do you want? This, Victoria said simply. Terrible coffee and honest conversations and someone who sees me as a person instead of an asset or a disappointment or a legacy to manage. I can do that, Daniel said. I'm actually pretty good at it. Yeah? Yeah. They stood there in the kitchen light, two people who shouldn't work on paper, who made no sense by any logical measure, who were absolutely terrified and completely sure at the same time. I should go, Victoria said, but she didn't move. Probably. Elliot is waiting for an answer. What are you going to tell him? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, and Daniel forced himself not to push, not to influence, to let her make this choice herself. The truth, she said finally, that I'm in love with my neighbor. And if that makes me foolish or reckless or every other thing my father will call me, then I guess I'm okay with that. Daniel's heart was hammering so hard he was sure Victoria could feel it. You're in love with your neighbor? Completely. Terrifyingly. Yes. She smiled, and it was that real smile, the one that transformed her entire face. Is that okay? That's more than okay. Daniel cupped her face in his hands, thumbs wiping away the last of her tears. That's everything. When he kissed her, it was soft and careful and full of promise. When she kissed him back, it was certain. Outside, the world kept turning. Elliot Grant waited for an answer. Charles Hale remained ignorant of the shift in his carefully laid plans. Jamie slept peacefully upstairs, unaware that his father's life was changing in the best possible way. But in that moment, in that cluttered kitchen, with its dripping faucet and unfinished renovations, Daniel Carter and Victoria Hale made a choice. Not the logical choice, not the easy choice, not the choice that anyone expected. The right choice. The storm, when it came, would be fierce. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight they had this. Hands held across a kitchen table, coffee growing cold, and the beginning of something neither of them had planned, but both of them needed. A life built not by expectation, but by choice. And that was enough. The morning after Victoria Hale walked out of Daniel Carter's kitchen with her lipstick smudged and her heart irrevocably committed, she sat in her corner office on the 42nd floor of the Hale Industries building and stared at her phone. Elliot had called 3 times, her father twice. Her assistant Margaret had already knocked once to ask if everything was all right, because Victoria never came in late, and she'd arrived today a full hour past her usual time, with her hair still damp from the shower and her makeup hastily applied. I'm fine, Victoria had said, which was both completely true and an absolute lie. She was terrified. She was exhilarated. She felt like she'd jumped off a cliff and discovered halfway down that she could fly. The intercom buzzed. Ms. Hale? Your father is on line 1. Victoria closed her eyes. Of course he was. She picked up the phone. Hi, Dad. Victoria. Charles Hale's voice was measured, controlled, the same tone he used in board meetings when he was about to dismantle someone's proposal piece by piece. Elliot called me this morning. He seems to be under the impression that you need space. I do. From what exactly? The man has been nothing but patient. He understands your work commitments. He's from a good family. He has his own career success. What more could you possibly want? Victoria looked out at the Charleston skyline, at the church steeples and harbor and historic buildings that had stood for centuries. She thought about Daniel's kitchen with its dripping faucet and mismatched chairs, about Jamie's dinosaur facts and Marmalade the cat and coffee that tasted like it had been filtered through an old sock. I want to be happy, she said quietly. There was a long pause. You are happy. You have everything you need. Having everything I need and being happy aren't the same thing. Victoria. Her father's voice sharpened. You're not a child anymore. Life isn't about chasing some romantic notion of happiness. It's about making smart decisions, building something lasting, choosing a partner who complements your goals. Elliot doesn't complement my goals. He tolerates them. There's a difference. Then what does complement your goals? What exactly are you looking for? Victoria thought about how to answer that, how to explain to her father that she wasn't looking for someone who fit into her life. She was looking for someone who made her want to build a different life entirely. I don't know yet, she said, but I know it's not Elliot. I see. Charles's voice went flat, dangerous. And does this sudden clarity have anything to do with your new neighbor? Victoria's stomach dropped. How did you? Charleston is a small city, Victoria. People talk. Mrs. Chen mentioned to Eleanor Whitmore that you've been having breakfast with some single father who just moved into the Henderson house. Eleanor mentioned it to Patricia Grant at their book club. Patricia mentioned it to Richard, who mentioned it to me. So let me ask you directly. Are you involved with this man? The lie would have been easy. She could have laughed it off, claimed they were just friendly neighbors, bought herself time to figure out how to navigate this impossible situation. But Victoria had spent 32 years being the daughter Charles Hale wanted instead of the person she actually was. And she was done. "Yes," she said, "I am." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long Victoria thought her father might have hung up. "I want to meet him," Charles said finally. "Dad, if you're serious about this, if you're willing to throw away a perfectly good match with Elliot for some stranger who just moved to town, then I want to meet him. Tonight, 6 o'clock, your house." "That's not 6 o'clock, Victoria. If he matters to you, he'll be there." The line went dead. Victoria sat in her office, holding the phone, feeling the weight of what she'd just set in motion settling over her like a physical thing. Then she called Daniel. Daniel was in the middle of a client presentation when his phone vibrated with Victoria's call. He ignored it the first time. The second time it rang, barely 2 minutes later, he excused himself and stepped into the hallway. "Hey, is everything—" "My father wants to meet you." Victoria's voice was tight, strained. "Tonight, 6 p.m., my house." Daniel leaned against the wall. "That was fast." "Charleston is a small city. People talk." "What did you tell him?" "The truth." A pause. "Was that wrong?" "No," Daniel said, even as his mind raced through everything this meant. "No, the truth is good. The truth is the only thing that makes sense." "He's going to hate you." "Probably." "He's going to try to intimidate you." "I'm sure he will." "Daniel," Victoria's voice cracked slightly, "I'm asking you to walk into a room with one of the most powerful men in Charleston and defend why you're dating his daughter. That's not fair to you." Daniel thought about the night before, about Victoria standing in his kitchen, crying in her expensive dress, choosing him over everything that made sense on paper, about the way she'd kissed him like he was air and she'd been drowning. "Fair doesn't matter," he said. "You matter. We matter. I'll be there." "You're sure?" "Completely." Another pause. "I'm sorry for dragging you into all of this." "Victoria, listen to me. You're not dragging me into anything. I'm choosing to be here. There's a difference." He heard her breathe out slowly. "What am I going to do with you?" "Hopefully keep me around." That got a small laugh. 6 o'clock. Don't be late. My father hates lateness almost as much as he hates poor investment decisions and people who put ice in whiskey. I'll be early, and I'll leave my ice at home." After he hung up, Daniel stood in the hallway for a long moment, letting the reality sink in. He was going to have dinner with Charles Hale. The Charles Hale, whose name was on buildings downtown, whose company employed 3,000 people, who had probably forgotten more about business and power and influence than Daniel would ever know. He was absolutely terrified. He went back into the conference room, finished his presentation, and somehow managed not to completely fall apart. At 3:15, Daniel picked Jamie up from school. His son bounced into the car with his usual enthusiasm, backpack dragging on the ground, one shoe untied. "Dad, guess what? Marcus is coming back." "Your friend Marcus who moved to Atlanta?" "Yes! His dad's job didn't work out, and they're moving back, and he's going to be in my class again, and it's the best day ever." Daniel smiled despite the anxiety churning in his stomach. "That's great, buddy. Can we celebrate? Can we get ice cream?" "Not tonight. I have something I need to do this evening." Jamie's face fell. "But Dad, I know. I'm sorry. How about tomorrow? We'll get ice cream and go to the park. Promise?" "Promise." They drove home in comfortable silence, Jamie humming to himself and swinging his legs. Daniel's mind was already racing ahead to 6 o'clock, to Charles Hale's assessment, to everything that could go wrong. "Dad?" Jamie said suddenly. "Are you okay?" Daniel glanced at his son in the rearview mirror. "Yeah, buddy. Why?" "You look worried." "I'm just thinking about work stuff." "Is it about Victoria?" Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Why would you think that?" "Because you get a different face when you think about Victoria. Not a work face. A different face." "A different face?" "Yeah, like happy but also scared. Like when we got Marmalade and you weren't sure if we should keep him, but you wanted to." They had, in fact, ended up keeping Marmalade. The cat had essentially moved himself in 3 days ago, and Daniel hadn't had the heart to take him to a shelter. He now slept on Jamie's bed and had destroyed 2 pairs of curtains. "You're very observant," Daniel said carefully. "I know. So, are you scared about Victoria?" Daniel pulled into their driveway and turned off the car. He twisted in his seat to look at his son directly. "Can I tell you something honest?" Jamie nodded seriously. "I really like Victoria. A lot. And tonight I'm going to meet her father, and he's a very important person who probably isn't going to like me very much." "Why wouldn't he like you?" "Because I'm not the kind of person he imagined for his daughter." Jamie frowned, considering this. "But you're nice, and you fix things, and you make Victoria smile." "Sometimes that's not enough for people." "That's stupid." "Jamie, it is. If someone makes you happy, that should be enough." "That's what you told me when Marcus moved away. You said we should be happy for him because his dad got a good job and they were going to be happy in Atlanta. You said happy is what matters most." Daniel felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. "You're right. I did say that. So if Victoria makes you happy, her dad should be happy too." "That's how it should work, yeah." "Then you should just tell him that." Daniel pulled Jamie into a hug, holding his son close and marveling at the simple wisdom of children who hadn't yet learned to overcomplicate everything. "You're pretty smart. You know that?" "I know," Jamie said, his voice muffled against Daniel's shoulder. "Mom used to say I got it from you." Daniel's breath caught. Jamie rarely mentioned Sarah anymore. Not because he'd forgotten her, but because the memories were tender, precious things he kept close. "Your mom was pretty smart too," Daniel said quietly. "The smartest." Jamie pulled back. "She would have liked Victoria." "Yeah?" "Yeah. Victoria listens like Mom did. Like she really cares about what you're saying, even if it's just dinosaur facts." Daniel's eyes burned. "I think Mom would have liked her too." They sat there for a moment in the car, father and son, holding on to memories and facing forward at the same time. "Okay," Jamie said finally, pulling away and unbuckling his seatbelt with renewed energy. "You should go get ready. You need to look nice for Victoria's dad." "I do?" "Dads always want you to look nice. It shows respect." "Where did you learn that?" "A book about manners that Grandma sent me. I didn't read all of it, but I read some of it." Daniel laughed. "All right, I'll look nice." "And Dad?" "Yeah?" "Just be you. That's who Victoria likes." At 5:45, Daniel stood in front of his bathroom mirror wearing the nicest shirt he owned, a blue button-down that Sarah had bought him for a work event years ago, and tried to convince himself he wasn't about to walk into a complete disaster. His next-door neighbor, Mrs. Chen, had agreed to watch Jamie for the evening, despite giving Daniel a knowing look that suggested she knew exactly what this dinner meant and had opinions about it. "Don't let him push you around," she'd said when Daniel dropped Jamie off. "Charles Hale is used to getting his way. Stand your ground." "Yes, ma'am." "And don't apologize for who you are. You're a good man, Daniel Carter. If he can't see that, it's his failing, not yours." Now walking across the lawn toward Victoria's house, Daniel tried to hold on to that confidence. The evening was cool, the sky deepening into twilight. Lights glowed warm in Victoria's windows. He knocked on the door at exactly 6 o'clock. Victoria answered, and Daniel's breath caught. She wore a simple black dress, pearls at her throat, her hair pulled back. She looked elegant and professional and absolutely terrified. "Hi," she said. "Hi. You look nice." "So do you." They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, drawing strength from the connection between them. "Ready?" Victoria asked. "Not even a little bit." "Me neither." She took his hand, squeezed once. "Let's do this anyway." She led him through the house, which looked even more immaculate than the last time he'd seen it, toward the dining room. And there, standing by the window with a glass of whiskey and an expression that could freeze fire, was Charles Hale. He was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that made you understand immediately why he ran a company worth hundreds of millions. His suit probably cost more than Daniel's car. His watch definitely did. He turned when they entered, and his eyes went straight to Daniel with the assessing gaze of a man who'd spent decades evaluating people and finding most of them wanting. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice measured and cool. "Thank you for coming." Daniel stepped forward, extending his hand. "Mr. Hale, I appreciate you having me." Charles's handshake was firm, brief, and told Daniel absolutely nothing about what the man was thinking. "Please sit," Charles said, gesturing to the dining table that was set for three. "I've had dinner brought in. Victoria tells me you have a young son at home, so I'll try to keep this brief." "I appreciate that." They sat. Victoria on one side of the table, Daniel across from her, Charles at the head like a judge presiding over a trial. A spread of food appeared, delivered by a catering service, Daniel realized, but he barely noticed what it was. His entire focus was on the man watching him with those sharp, calculating eyes. "So," Charles said, pouring wine for himself and Victoria, but not offering any to Daniel. "Tell me about yourself, Mr. Carter." Daniel had known this question was coming, had practiced his answer in his head a dozen times, but now sitting here, he decided to throw out the careful speech he'd prepared. "I'm a single father," he said. "I have a 7-year-old son named Jamie. I moved to Charleston 3 months ago to start my own architecture firm after leaving my corporate job in Philadelphia. I'm currently living in a house that needs about 6 months of work and has a cat that I didn't technically agree to adopt, but who apparently adopted us. And I'm in love with your daughter." Victoria's eyes widened. They hadn't actually said those words to each other yet. Charles's expression didn't change. "That's quite direct. You asked." "I did." Charles took a sip of his wine. "And what makes you think you're a suitable match for Victoria?" "I don't." That got a reaction. Charles's eyebrows rose slightly. "Excuse me?" "I don't think I'm a suitable match for Victoria, not by any conventional measure." Daniel kept his voice steady. "I can't offer her the kind of life Elliot Grant can. I don't have family connections or old money or a guaranteed future. My business is growing, but it's still new, still uncertain. My house is a construction project. I come with a child, which is complicated. By every logical standard, I'm not what you'd want for your daughter." "Then why are you here?" "Because Victoria doesn't want logic, she wants truth. And the truth is that I see her, really see her, as a person instead of a legacy or a company or a piece on a chessboard. The truth is that she makes me laugh and challenges me and fits into my life and my son's life like she was always meant to be there. The truth is that I will work every day to make her happy, even when it's hard, even when it would be easier to give up." Charles stared at him for a long moment. "You know nothing about my daughter's world, the pressure she's under, the expectations, the constant scrutiny." "You're right, I don't know it, but I'm willing to learn it. I'm willing to stand next to her in it." "And when it becomes too much?" "When the society pages start printing stories about the CEO dating some struggling architect? When her business associates question her judgment? When you realize that being with her means living in a spotlight you never asked for?" "Then I'll deal with it," Daniel said simply, "because she's worth it." Victoria had been silent through this entire exchange, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Now she spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "Dad, stop." Charles turned to her. "Victoria, no, I asked you to meet Daniel because he matters to me, not so you could interrogate him like a hostile witness, not so you could try to prove he's not good enough. I'm trying to protect you. I don't need protecting. I need support. There's a difference." "You're making a mistake," Charles said, and for the first time Daniel heard something other than authority in his voice. He heard fear. "You're throwing away everything we've built." "Everything you've built," Victoria interrupted. "You've been planning my life since I was born. The right schools, the right degree, the right career path, the right husband, and I followed it all. Every single step. I became exactly what you wanted me to be. But Dad," her voice cracked slightly, "I'm not happy." Charles flinched as if she'd struck him. "You have everything." "I have everything except a life that feels like mine." Victoria looked at Daniel, and her expression softened. "And then I met someone who didn't want me to be Victoria Hale, CEO. He just wanted me to be Victoria, and for the first time in 10 years, I felt like I could breathe." The silence that followed was heavy, weighted with years of unspoken tension and expectations and love that had gotten twisted into control. Charles set down his wine glass carefully. "You're serious about this?" "Completely. Even knowing what it will cost you, the questions, The gossip? The complications? Even knowing that, Charles turned back to Daniel, and something in his expression had shifted. Not acceptance exactly, but a grudging acknowledgement. "What are your intentions with my daughter, Mr. Carter?" It was such an old-fashioned question that Daniel almost smiled. But he could see the genuine concern behind it, the father's worry beneath the businessman's armor. "I intend to build a life with her," Daniel said. "If she'll have me. I intend to support her career, be a partner she can rely on, and do everything I can to make sure she never regrets choosing me. I intend to introduce her to my son as someone who matters, someone who's going to be part of our family. And I intend to love her, honestly and completely, for as long as she'll let me." Charles studied him for a long moment. Then he picked up his whiskey, finished it in one swallow, and stood up. "I don't approve of this," he said bluntly. "I think you're both making a mistake. I think you're underestimating how difficult this will be. And I think, Victoria, that you're letting emotion override judgment." Victoria started to respond, but Charles held up a hand. "However," he looked at Daniel, "I've built a career on assessing people. And you, Mr. Carter, are either completely sincere or the best liar I've ever met. For Victoria's sake, I hope it's the former." "It is," Daniel said quietly. "I promise you that." "We'll see." Charles picked up his coat. "I'm going to leave you both to finish dinner. Victoria, I'll expect you at the board meeting on Friday. We have the defense contract to finalize." "I'll be there." Charles paused at the door, looking back at his daughter. "I want you to be happy. I hope you know that. I may have a terrible way of showing it, but everything I've done has been because I wanted to give you the best life possible." "I know, Dad," Victoria said softly. "But the best life isn't the one you planned for me. It's the one I choose for myself." Charles's jaw tightened. Then he nodded once and left. The front door closed. A car engine started outside. Silence settled over the dining room. Daniel and Victoria sat across from each other, both slightly shell-shocked, neither quite believing what had just happened. "That went," Daniel started. "Terribly?" Victoria finished. "I was going to say better than I expected, but terribly also works." Victoria laughed, a slightly hysterical edge to it. "He didn't throw you out. That's something." "Is that the bar we're setting? Not being physically removed from the premises?" "For my father? Yes." Daniel stood up and walked around the table, pulling Victoria to her feet and into his arms. She came willingly, burying her face against his shoulder. "You said you loved me," she said, her voice muffled. "I did." "In front of my father." Seemed like the right moment. That was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Could be both. Victoria pulled back to look at him. "I love you too, in case that wasn't clear." It was fairly clear, but I don't mind hearing it again. "I love you, Daniel Carter. I love your terrible coffee, and your half-finished house, and your sweet son, and the way you see me as a person, instead of a company, or a legacy, or a problem to be solved. That's a lot of things to love. I'm a thorough person." Daniel kissed her, soft and certain. When they pulled apart, Victoria rested her forehead against his. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we figure it out together, one day at a time. My father still doesn't approve." "But he didn't forbid it either. That's progress. The board is going to have questions when this becomes public. Let them ask. Elliot is going to be not our problem anymore." Victoria smiled. "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple. Not easy, but simple. We choose each other. Everything else is just details." They stood there in Victoria's perfect dining room, holding each other, two people who made no sense on paper but perfect sense in every way that mattered. Outside, Charleston settled into evening. The historic streets glowed with streetlights. The harbor reflected the moon, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang 7 times. Us. 3 days later, Victoria sat in the Hale Industries conference room with 12 board members, her father at one end of the table and her at the other, and wondered if this was what walking into battle felt like. The defense contract discussion had gone well. The quarterly earnings report was solid. But now, as the meeting was wrapping up, Thomas Whitmore, one of her father's oldest friends and most trusted advisors, cleared his throat. "Before we adjourn, I think we should address the elephant in the room." Victoria's stomach tightened. "Here it comes." What elephant would that be, Thomas? She asked, keeping her voice level. Your relationship with Daniel Carter. The room went silent. Every eye turned to Victoria. My personal life, Victoria said carefully, is not board business. It is when it affects the company's reputation, Thomas countered. You're not just Victoria Hale anymore. You're the face of this company. Your choices reflect on all of us. My relationship reflects poorly how, exactly? He's a nobody, Richard Grant said bluntly. Elliot's father. Of course he would weigh in. No family connections, no established business, no reputation to speak of. People will wonder about your judgment. My judgment in running this company has been excellent, Victoria said, her voice turning cold. We've increased revenue by 18% in the last 2 years. We've secured 3 major contracts. Employee satisfaction is at an all-time high. My personal relationship has 0 impact on those facts. But perception is not reality, Victoria interrupted. And I won't base my personal decisions on what people might think or say or whisper at country club brunches. Charles had been silent through this exchange. Now he spoke, his voice measured. Gentlemen, I understand your concerns. I share some of them. But Victoria is right. Her personal life is her own business. Unless someone can demonstrate actual harm to the company, this discussion is over. It was the smallest possible defense, barely more than neutral territory. But coming from Charles Hale, it was significant. Thomas looked like he wanted to argue further, but Charles's expression made it clear the subject was closed. Fine, Thomas said. But don't say we didn't warn you when the society pages have a field day with this. The meeting adjourned. Victoria gathered her papers, maintaining her composure until the room cleared. Only Charles remained. Thank you, Victoria said quietly. I didn't do it for you, Charles replied. I did it because they were out of line. Your personal life is your business, but Victoria... He met her eyes. This isn't going to be easy. The scrutiny, the questions, the judgment. Are you prepared for that? No, Victoria admitted. But I'm doing it anyway. Charles nodded slowly. You're more like me than you think. Stubborn, determined, willing to fight for what you believe in, even when it's hard. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. He paused. Bring him to dinner, next Sunday. Your mother should meet him. Victoria's eyes widened. Really? If he's going to be part of your life, then he's going to be part of ours. Might as well face that reality head on. It wasn't approval, but it was acknowledgement. And from Charles Hale, that was something. Sunday dinner at the Hale estate was exactly as intimidating as Daniel had imagined. The house was a colonial mansion in the historic district, the kind of place that had been in the family for generations and showed it. Antique furniture, oil paintings of stern-looking ancestors, a dining room that could seat 20 people comfortably. Daniel wore the same blue shirt from the last dinner, paired with his best pants and shoes that he'd polished until they shined. Jamie was with his grandparents in Philadelphia for the weekend, which was probably for the best. One Hale family dinner at a time. Victoria's mother, Catherine Hale, turned out to be nothing like Daniel expected. She was tall and elegant like her daughter, but where Charles was all sharp edges and assessment, Catherine was warmth and quiet observation. She greeted Daniel with a genuine smile, asked about his son with what seemed like real interest, and made him feel welcome in a way that Charles's formal politeness hadn't. So you're the architect who's stolen my daughter's heart, Catherine said over dinner, and there was gentle teasing in her tone. I'm not sure about stolen, Daniel replied. She chose to give it. There's a difference. Catherine smiled. There is indeed. The dinner conversation flowed more easily than the last one. Catherine asked about Daniel's business, his plans for the house, his background. Charles remained mostly quiet, watching, assessing, but not attacking. Halfway through the meal, Victoria's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, frowned, and excused herself from the table. When she returned 5 minutes later, her expression was troubled. What's wrong? Daniel asked immediately. Victoria looked at her father. Elliot just sent me a text. He's giving an interview to Charleston Living magazine about our former relationship. Charles's expression darkened. What kind of interview? He didn't say specifically, just that he wanted to set the record straight about what happened between us. That manipulative... Charles caught himself, glancing at Catherine. I'll handle this. No, Victoria said firmly. I'll handle it. It's my life, my decision. I'll contact the magazine directly. Victoria, Dad, I appreciate the protective instinct, but this is exactly what I was talking about. I need to fight my own battles. Charles looked like he wanted to argue, but Catherine placed a hand on his arm. Let her handle it, Charles, she said quietly. She's more than capable. The rest of the dinner was subdued. When it was time to leave, Catherine pulled Daniel aside while Victoria was getting her coat. My husband is struggling with this, Catherine said quietly. Not because he doesn't like you, though he'd never admit it if he did, but because his entire life has been about control, planning, making sure everything goes according to design, and you represent chaos, the unknown, something he can't plan for or manage. I understand that. Do you? Catherine studied him. Because it's going to get harder before it gets easier. Charles will test you. Society will judge you. And there will be moments when you question whether this is worth it. It is, Daniel said simply. She is. Catherine smiled. Good. Because my daughter has spent her entire life trying to be what everyone else wanted. It's about time she chose something for herself. She paused. Take care of her, Daniel. Not because she needs protecting, she doesn't, but because she deserves someone who sees her value beyond her last name and her company. I will, Daniel promised. I swear I will. The Charleston Living article came out 3 days later. Daniel was at a construction site when Victoria called, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. Have you seen it? No, what? Elliot gave them a full interview. He's painting himself as the patient, devoted boyfriend who was blindsided when I suddenly started dating some nobody who moved in next door. He's implying that I'm having some kind of crisis, that I'm not thinking clearly, that he's waiting for me to come to my senses. Daniel felt anger surge through him, hot and protective. That's manipulative, condescending, infuriating. Yes. Victoria took a breath. I'm calling the magazine. I'm giving them a statement. What are you going to say? The truth. That I ended things with Elliot because we weren't right for each other. That I'm in a relationship with you because you make me happy. That my personal life is no one's business but my own. Victoria, are you sure? Once you go public, I'm sure. Her voice was steady now, certain. I'm done hiding. I'm done letting other people control the narrative. If Elliot wants to make this public, then fine. We'll be public, on our terms. That evening, Charleston Living posted Victoria's statement on their website. It was clear, direct, and uncompromising. I have tremendous respect for Elliot Grant, but our relationship ended because we wanted different things. I'm currently in a relationship with Daniel Carter, an architect and single father who makes me happier than I've been in years. My personal life is exactly that, personal, and I won't be commenting further on it. I hope the people of Charleston will respect that privacy. The response was immediate and divided. Some people, particularly in the business community, were supportive. Others were critical, questioning Victoria's judgment, speculating about her stability, predicting disaster. The society pages had a field day, just as Thomas Whitmore had predicted, but through it all, Victoria and Daniel stood together. When reporters showed up at Daniel's house, he politely declined to comment and went back to work. When photographers tried to catch pictures of them together, they ignored the cameras and kept living their lives. And slowly, gradually, the fervor began to die down, because Charleston, for all its interest in gossip and scandal, eventually moved on to the next story. 2 weeks after the article, Daniel and Victoria took Jamie to the park. It was a sunny Saturday, warm enough that they'd brought a picnic lunch and planned to spend the afternoon watching Jamie play. They sat on a bench, Victoria's head resting on Daniel's shoulder, watching Jamie navigate the climbing structure with single-minded determination. He's gonna fall, Daniel said, not really worried. He's fine, Victoria replied. How can you tell? Because he has that look. The same look you get when you're working on a difficult design, total focus. Daniel smiled. You've been paying attention. I pay attention to everything about you two. Jamie successfully completed his climb and waved triumphantly from the top. They waved back. So, Victoria said casually, I've been thinking. Dangerous. Very. She sat up, turning to face him. My lease on the house is up in 3 months. Okay. And your renovations are going to take at least another 6 months, probably longer. That's an accurate assessment, yes. So I was thinking maybe I could help with the renovations. Not financially, she added quickly, seeing his expression, but with time, labor, actually doing the work. I'm not completely useless with tools. Daniel stared at her. You want to help renovate my house? Our house, Victoria corrected softly. If you'll have me. Not moving in right away, she clarified. That's too fast, especially with Jamie to consider. But being part of it, building it together, making it ours. Daniel felt something expand in his chest, warm and certain. You're serious? Completely. You, Victoria Hale, CEO of an $800 million company, want to spend your free time helping me install drywall and paint walls and fix plumbing. When you say it like that, it sounds ridiculous. It is ridiculous. Daniel cupped her face in his hands. It's also the best thing anyone's ever offered me. Victoria's smile could have lit the entire park. Is that a yes? That's a yes to all of it, to building this together, to making it ours, to whatever comes next. They kissed while Jamie made exaggerated gagging noises from the top of the climbing structure, and Daniel thought about how his life had changed in 3 months. He'd moved to Charleston looking for a fresh start. What he'd found was something infinitely better. A partner. A future. A life built not by expectation or plan, but by choice and chance and the quiet courage of two people who decided to build something new together. It wasn't perfect. It was complicated and messy and would probably get more difficult before it got easier. But it was theirs. And that was enough. The first time Victoria Hale showed up at Daniel's house wearing work boots, old jeans, and a t-shirt that said Hale Industries 5K Run 2023, Daniel had to stop himself from laughing. What? She asked, hands on her hips, defensive. Nothing. You just look... Don't say cute. I'm here to work. I was going to say determined. Oh. Victoria relaxed slightly. Good. Because I am. What are we doing today? It was a Saturday morning in late October, 3 weeks after their conversation in the park. Jamie was at a birthday party for Marcus, giving them a rare few hours alone. Daniel had planned to spend the time replacing the rotted subflooring in the upstairs bathroom, unglamorous work that required patience and precision. Are you sure you want to do this? Daniel asked. It's not exciting. It's actually pretty miserable. I'm sure. Show me what to do. So he did. He showed her how to pry up the old flooring without damaging the joists beneath, how to measure and cut new plywood, how to use the nail gun without shooting herself in the foot. Victoria listened with the same focused intensity she probably brought to board meetings, asking questions when she didn't understand, taking mental notes, approaching the whole thing like a project she was determined to master. They worked in comfortable silence, interrupted only by occasional instructions and the sounds of construction. The screech of nails being pulled, the whine of the saw, the satisfying thunk of new boards being fitted into place. 2 hours in, Victoria sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead and leaving a streak of dust across her face. This is hard, she said. Yeah. Like, really hard. I have muscles hurting that I didn't know existed. Welcome to home renovation. How have you been doing this for months? Daniel shrugged. You get used to it, or you just learn to live with the pain. Victoria looked around at the half-finished bathroom, at the tools scattered across the floor, at the mess and chaos that came with tearing something down to build it back better. I like it, she said suddenly. The pain? No, well, maybe a little, but I like this. Working with my hands, building something real, seeing actual progress. She smiled. At work, everything is abstract. Numbers on spreadsheets, contracts on paper, decisions that affect people I'll never meet. But this, she gestured at the new flooring. This is tangible, real. When we're done, this floor will be here. We made it. Daniel understood exactly what she meant. It was why he'd left corporate architecture, why he'd chosen to start his own firm. There was something deeply satisfying about creation, about taking raw materials and vision and effort and turning them into something that mattered. You're good at this, he said. I'm terrible at this. I've hit my thumb with the hammer twice. But you keep trying. That's what makes you good at it. Victoria met his eyes, and something passed between them: understanding, connection, the recognition of two people building more than just a bathroom floor. "Daniel?" she said softly. "Yeah? Thank you for letting me be part of this. Thank you for wanting to be." They finished the subflooring as the afternoon light began to slant through the windows, golden and warm. Daniel was securing the last piece when his phone rang. His contractor friend, Mike. "Hey, man," Mike said when Daniel answered. "I've got a situation. The commercial project I was working on just fell through. Client went bankrupt. Whole thing's a mess. Which means I've suddenly got 3 weeks of completely free time and a crew with nothing to do." Daniel's mind immediately went to the list of projects he couldn't tackle alone. The roof, the electrical panel, the structural work in the kitchen. "What are you thinking?" Daniel asked carefully. "I'm thinking if you can cover materials and pay my guys their hourly rate, we could knock out some of the big stuff you've been putting off. No markup on labor, just cost. Call it a favor for a friend." Daniel did quick math in his head. It would drain his savings, push his budget past comfortable into risky. But it would also move the renovation timeline up by months. "Can I call you back in an hour?" "Sure thing." He hung up and found Victoria watching him with curious eyes. "Problem?" she asked. Daniel explained the situation, walking her through the numbers, the risk, the potential reward. Victoria listened without interrupting, and he could practically see her CEO brain working through the variables. "You should do it," she said when he finished. "It's a risk. It's an opportunity. There's a difference. Victoria, if something goes wrong with my business, if I lose a client or have an unexpected expense, I won't have any cushion." "Then don't lose a client," she said simply. "Daniel, you're good at what you do. Your business is growing. Sometimes you have to take calculated risks to move forward." "Is that what you do?" "It's what I did. 2 years ago when I took over as CEO, the company was stable but stagnant. Everyone told me to play it safe, maintain the status quo. Instead, I invested heavily in new equipment and bid on contracts we'd never pursued before. It was risky. It could have failed. But it didn't. And now we're stronger than we've ever been." Daniel considered this. "So you're saying I should call Mike back and say yes?" "I'm saying you should trust yourself. You know what this house needs. You know what your business can handle. Make the decision that feels right, not the decision that feels safe." It was exactly what Daniel needed to hear. He called Mike back and accepted the offer. 3 days later, Mike's crew descended on the house like an organized tornado. Within a week, they'd replaced the roof, updated the electrical panel, and started on the kitchen renovation. The house that had been a slow-burning project suddenly leaped forward in progress. Victoria came over most evenings after work, trading her business suits for work clothes, learning alongside Daniel as Mike's crew taught them the finer points of construction. She learned to read electrical diagrams, to properly insulate walls, to tile a backsplash with precision. Jamie thought it was the best thing ever. He'd appointed himself official supervisor, creating elaborate inspection checklists and giving serious progress reports. "The kitchen is 73% done," he announced one evening, consulting his clipboard. "But we need to talk about the cabinet color. I think dinosaur green would be better than white." "Buddy, we've discussed this," Daniel said patiently. "Dinosaur green is not a real color option." "It could be if we wanted it to be." Victoria hid her smile. "What if we compromise? White cabinets, but we could paint one wall a nice green, like a forest green." Jamie considered this seriously. "Acceptable, but I want it on the record that dinosaur green would have been cooler." "Duly noted," Victoria said, making a show of writing it down. The easy rhythm between Victoria and Jamie had deepened over the past weeks. She'd started joining them for dinner several times a week, helping with homework, listening to elaborate stories about school drama, becoming a natural part of their small family unit. One evening, about a month into the renovation push, Daniel came downstairs to find Victoria and Jamie curled up on the couch, reading together. Jamie's head was resting against her shoulder, her arm around him, both of them completely absorbed in whatever book they'd chosen. The sight hit Daniel with unexpected force. This woman he loved, this brilliant, complicated, wonderful woman, fitting into his life and his son's life like she'd always belonged there. Victoria looked up and caught him staring. "What?" "Nothing," Daniel said, his voice rougher than intended. "Just, Nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. Later that night, after Jamie was in bed and Victoria was preparing to head home, Daniel caught her hand. "Stay," he said. Victoria turned back to him, understanding exactly what he was asking. They'd been careful, taking things slowly, mindful of Jamie and the newness of their relationship and the scrutiny they were under. "Daniel, I know we said we'd wait. I know we're being cautious. But Victoria, you're here every evening anyway. Jamie asks when you're coming over if you're not here. You have a drawer in my dresser and a toothbrush in the bathroom. At what point do we stop pretending you don't already live here?" Victoria bit her lip, and he could see her working through the implications. "People will talk." "People are already talking. Your renovation isn't finished. There's still dust everywhere and half the house doesn't have proper flooring." "I know. And I'd have to tell my father. He'll have opinions." "I'm sure he will." "And Jamie, we'd need to talk to him first, make sure he's okay with it." "Agreed." Victoria looked around at the half-finished house, at the chaos and potential and promise of it all. "This is crazy. Completely. I haven't lived with anyone since college. I haven't lived with anyone since Sarah." They stood there in the cluttered living room, both of them terrified and certain at the same time. "Ask me again tomorrow," Victoria said finally. "After we've both slept on it, after you've talked to Jamie. If you still want this, if he's okay with it, then yes, I'll stay." The next morning, Daniel sat Jamie down for a serious conversation over pancakes. "Buddy, I need to talk to you about something important." Jamie looked up from his breakfast, suddenly wary. "Is someone sick?" No, nothing like that. It's about Victoria." Jamie relaxed. "Oh, I like Victoria." "I know you do, and she really likes you too. But I need to ask you something, and I need you to be totally honest with me, okay? No saying what you think I want to hear. The truth, okay? How would you feel if Victoria moved in with us? Like, lived here all the time instead of just visiting?" Jamie was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Daniel forced himself not to fill the silence, to let his son work through his feelings. "Would she have her own room?" Jamie asked finally. "She'd share my room. Is that okay?" Another pause. "Would she help make breakfast?" "Probably, yeah." "And would she still help me with homework?" "I'm sure she would." "And play games with us?" "Yes." Jamie nodded slowly. "Then it's okay. I like when Victoria's here. The house feels less quiet." Daniel's throat tightened. "It does, doesn't it?" "Dad?" Jamie looked up at him with those serious 7-year-old eyes. "Do you love Victoria the way you loved Mom?" It was the question Daniel had been dreading and expecting in equal measure. He took a breath, choosing his words carefully. "I love Victoria very much, but it's different from how I loved your mom. Not better or worse, just different. Your mom was my first love, and she'll always be special. She gave me you, which is the best gift I've ever gotten. But love isn't like a cup that empties when you pour it out. There's always more. Loving Victoria doesn't mean I love your mom less, or that I love you less. It just means my heart got bigger." Jamie considered this with the seriousness he brought to important matters. "Mom would want you to be happy." "I think so too. And Victoria makes you happy, I can tell." "She does, very much." "Then it's okay," Jamie decided. "She can move in." "But Dad?" "Yeah, buddy." "Can we still have boys' night sometimes, just you and me?" Daniel pulled his son into a hug. "Always. Boys' night is sacred. That's not changing." "Okay, then I'm good." That evening, Daniel called Victoria and told her Jamie's response. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "He really said that?" Victoria asked, her voice thick with emotion. "About the house feeling less quiet?" "Word for word." "That kid is going to make me cry." "He has that effect on people." Another pause. "I need to talk to my parents first, and I need a few days to sort out the logistics, what to bring, what to put in storage, when to officially end my lease. But Daniel, yeah? Yes, my answer is yes. I want this. I want us." "Yeah?" "Completely." Breaking the news to Charles and Catherine Hale was exactly as complicated as Victoria had anticipated. She'd invited them to lunch at a quiet restaurant downtown. neutral territory where her father couldn't dominate the conversation through sheer force of presence in his own space. Catherine understood immediately, her eyes lighting up with genuine happiness. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you." Charles was less enthusiastic. "You're moving in with him," he said flatly. "After dating for what, 3 months?" "4 months," Victoria corrected. "And yes, that's impulsive, reckless. It's also my decision. A decision that will have consequences. What will the board think? What about company optics?" "The board doesn't get a vote in my personal life," Victoria said firmly. "And if they have a problem with it, they can bring it up at the next meeting and I'll address it then. But Dad, I'm done defending my choices to people who think they know better than I do what I need." Charles's jaw tightened. "I'm not trying to control you." "Yes, you are. You've been trying to control me my entire life. The schools I attended, the degree I pursued, the career path I followed, the man I should marry. And I went along with all of it because I wanted to make you proud. But, Dad," her voice softened slightly, "I'm 32 years old. I run a successful company. I'm happy for the first time in years. At some point, you have to trust that you raised me well enough to make my own decisions." Catherine placed a hand on Charles's arm. "She's right, dear. You can't possibly think this is a good idea. I think our daughter is in love with a good man who treats her well. I think she's happier than we've seen her in years. And I think we should support her, even if it's not what we would have chosen." Charles looked between his wife and daughter, clearly outnumbered. "He doesn't come from our world." "No," Victoria agreed. "He comes from a better one where people say what they mean, where relationships are built on honesty instead of social advantage, where love matters more than lineage. You're being naive. I'm being hopeful. There's a difference." Charles was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was resigned. "You're not going to change your mind." "No, and nothing I say will make a difference." "Probably not." He sighed heavily. "Your mother's right. You are happy. I can see it. And Daniel—" He paused, as if the admission pained him. "Daniel treats you with respect. He stood up to me when most men would have backed down, and Jamie is a good kid." "So you're okay with this?" Victoria asked cautiously. "I wouldn't go that far, but I'm accepting it, because you're my daughter and I love you, even when I think you're making questionable choices." It wasn't a blessing, but it was progress. And from Charles Hale, that was something. Victoria moved in on a Saturday in mid-November. The renovation was far from finished. The upstairs bathroom still needed fixtures, the living room needed paint, and the back porch was still a structural disaster, but the house was livable, comfortable, starting to feel like a home. She didn't bring much. Most of her furniture went into storage. It was too formal, too expensive, too much a reminder of the life she was leaving behind. Instead, she brought clothes, books, personal items, and a few pieces that meant something. Her mother's painting, her grandmother's quilt, the coffee maker that actually made good coffee. Daniel and Jamie helped her unpack, turning it into a game. Jamie appointed himself in charge of organizing her bookshelf, arranging everything by color because it looks prettier that way, even if it's not alphabetical. By evening, Victoria's belongings were scattered throughout the house, mixing with Daniel's and Jamie's in a way that felt natural. Her running shoes by the door next to Daniel's work boots. Her coffee mug in the cabinet next to the dinosaur cup Jamie insisted on using. Her books on the shelf next to Daniel's architecture texts and Jamie's picture books. That night, after Jamie was asleep, Daniel and Victoria stood in their bedroom now, not just his, and looked at each other with a mix of excitement and terror. "This is real," Victoria said. "Very real. I live here now." "You do?" "With you and Jamie and Marmalade." "Don't forget the mice in the walls. They're part of the family, too." Victoria laughed. "Are there actually mice in the walls?" "I really hope not." They climbed into bed, and for the first time Victoria fell asleep in Daniel's arms in what was now their shared space. It felt different from all the other nights she'd stayed over. More permanent, more committed, more like the beginning of something lasting. The first few weeks of living together had their challenges. Victoria learned that Daniel was constitutionally incapable of putting dishes directly into the dishwasher, preferring to leave them in the sink for later. Daniel learned that Victoria needed absolute silence in the morning until she'd had at least one cup of coffee. They both learned that sharing a bathroom with limited counter space required negotiation and compromise. But they also learned the rhythms of each other's lives in a deeper way. Daniel learned that Victoria had nightmares sometimes about board meetings gone wrong, about failing her father, about losing everything she'd built. Victoria learned that Daniel sometimes woke in the middle of the night and went downstairs to work on designs, unable to shut off his brain. They learned to comfort each other, to give space when needed and closeness when wanted, to build a partnership that worked for both of them. Jamie adapted with the easy resilience of childhood. He liked having Victoria there in the mornings, liked that there was always someone to help with homework, liked that dinner didn't always come from a box or a delivery service. One evening, about 3 weeks after Victoria moved in, Jamie wandered into the kitchen where she was cooking dinner while Daniel was at a late client meeting. "Victoria," he said, unusually hesitant. "What's up, kiddo? Can I ask you something?" "Always." Jamie climbed onto one of the kitchen stools, swinging his legs. "Are you going to be my mom now?" Victoria's hand stilled over the vegetables she was chopping. This was territory she and Daniel had discussed, but hadn't yet navigated with Jamie directly. "Do you want me to be?" she asked carefully. Jamie thought about this. "I already have a mom. I don't remember her very much, but Dad says she was really nice and she loved me a lot." "Your dad is right. She did love you very much, but she's not here anymore, and you are. So I was thinking maybe you could be like an extra mom, not instead of her, but also." Victoria's eyes burned. She set down the knife and moved to sit next to Jamie, taking his small hand in hers. "I would be honored to be your extra mom," she said softly. "I can't replace your first mom, and I wouldn't try to. But I can promise that I love you, and I'm not going anywhere, and I'll always be here when you need me." "Even for the boring stuff, like parent-teacher conferences and school plays?" "Especially for the boring stuff," Jamie nodded, satisfied. "Okay, then you can be my extra mom, but I'm going to call you Victoria because that's your name, and it sounds cooler than Mom anyway. That's totally fine." "And Victoria?" "Yeah? Thanks for making Dad happy. He smiles more now." The simple observation broke something open in Victoria's chest. She pulled Jamie into a hug, holding this sweet, perceptive child who'd somehow decided she was worth keeping. "You make me happy too," she said. "Both of you." When Daniel came home an hour later, he found them still in the kitchen, Victoria teaching Jamie how to properly season vegetables while they debated the superior qualities of various dinosaurs. The scene was so domestic, so perfectly normal, that Daniel had to pause in the doorway just to take it in. This was his life now. This was his family. "Hey," he said, announcing his presence. "Dad." Jamie spun around. "Victoria is teaching me about garlic. Did you know you're supposed to smash it first?" "I did know that, yeah." "Well, I didn't. We're learning together." Daniel caught Victoria's eye over Jamie's head. She was smiling, relaxed, happy. She mouthed, "We need to talk later." But her expression wasn't worried, so Daniel filed it away for after Jamie went to bed. They ate dinner as a family, a phrase that Daniel was getting used to thinking without qualification. They talked about Jamie's day at school, about Daniel's client meeting, about Victoria's ongoing battle with one of her board members who kept questioning her decisions. After dinner, Jamie went upstairs to read while Daniel and Victoria cleaned up together. "So," Daniel said, loading the dishwasher that Victoria had already loaded once, but that he insisted on rearranging because there's a more efficient way to do it. "What did we need to talk about?" Victoria told him about her conversation with Jamie, about the extra mom designation, about the promise she'd made. Daniel listened without interrupting, his hands stilling over the dishes. "Is that okay?" Victoria asked when she finished. I didn't want to overstep, but he asked directly, and I didn't know how else to answer. Daniel cut her off with a kiss, deep and grateful, and full of love. "It's more than okay," he said when they pulled apart. "Victoria, you've been more present in Jamie's life in 4 months than some people manage in years. He loves you. I love you. You're not overstepping. You're exactly where you're supposed to be." "Yeah?" "Absolutely." They finished the dishes in comfortable silence, and Daniel thought about how far they'd come. 4 months ago, Victoria had knocked on his door looking for a flashlight. Now she lived here, co-parented his son, and had become so integral to his life that he couldn't imagine it without her. The universe worked in strange ways sometimes. Later that night, after Jamie was asleep and they were getting ready for bed, Victoria's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and frowned. "It's Elliot," she said. Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. "At 11 p.m. "Yeah." Victoria answered the call, putting it on speaker. "Elliot, this isn't a good time. I'm getting married," Elliot interrupted, his voice slightly slurred. "Engaged. Jennifer Ashford. You know Jennifer, right? Met her at the club. 6 weeks we've been dating. 6 weeks and I'm engaged." Daniel and Victoria exchanged glances. Elliot was clearly drunk. "That's congratulations," Victoria said carefully. Is it? Is it congratulations? Because I'm not sure. I'm not sure about anything anymore." "You were supposed to be the one, Victoria. My father said so. Your father said so. Everyone said so." "Elliot, but you chose him, the architect, the nobody. You chose him over me." "Elliot, you're drunk. You should get some sleep." "I just wanted you to know," Elliot continued as if she hadn't spoken, "that I'm happy. Jennifer is great. She's perfect. She's everything I should want." "Then I'm happy for you," Victoria said gently. Are you? Are you really?" "Yes. I hope you'll be very happy together." There was a long pause. When Elliot spoke again, his voice was quieter, more sober. "I hope you know what you're doing, Victoria. I hope he's worth it." "He is," Victoria said, looking at Daniel. "He absolutely is." Elliot hung up without saying goodbye. Victoria set down her phone and sighed. Well, that was uncomfortable. "You okay?" Daniel asked. "Yeah, just sad for him, I guess. He's marrying someone to prove he's over me, and that's not a good foundation for anything. That's not your responsibility." "I know, but I still feel bad." Daniel pulled her close. "You're a good person. That's one of the many reasons I love you. Even when I bring drunk ex-boyfriend's drama into our bedroom? Especially then." They settled into bed, Victoria curling into Daniel's side, both of them processing the strange call. "Daniel?" Victoria said quietly, just as he was starting to drift off. "Yeah? When we get married..." She paused, realizing what she'd said. "I mean, if we get married, not assuming, just theoretically." Daniel's heart was suddenly pounding. "Theoretically? Theoretically, would you want something big and formal, or small and simple? Are we theoretically planning our theoretical wedding at 11:30 on a Tuesday night?" "Maybe." Daniel smiled into the darkness. "Theoretically, I'd want whatever made you happy. But personally, I'd prefer small and simple. Just the people who matter." "That sounds perfect," Victoria said softly. They fell asleep tangled together, both of them thinking about theoretical weddings that felt increasingly less theoretical, and Daniel thought about how lucky he was to have found this woman who fit into his life like she'd been designed for it. The house still needed work. His business was still growing. Jamie still had rough days missing his mother. Victoria still had battles with her father and her board. But they had this. They had each other. They had a home they were building together, literally and metaphorically, one day and one choice at a time. And for now, that was more than enough. It was everything. The theoretical wedding conversation had planted a seed that neither Daniel nor Victoria could quite ignore. It sat between them over morning coffee, surfaced during quiet evenings on the newly finished back porch, hummed in the background of their daily routines like a question waiting to be asked properly. But it was Jamie who forced the issue, as children have a habit of doing. It happened on a Tuesday morning in early December. Victoria was making breakfast while Daniel searched for Jamie's missing library book, and Jamie was sitting at the kitchen table drawing what appeared to be a very elaborate diagram. "What are you working on, kiddo?" Victoria asked, setting down a plate of scrambled eggs. "A plan," Jamie said seriously, not looking up from his drawing. "A plan for what?" "For when you and Dad get married. See, I figure we need at least 20 chairs for the ceremony, and then there should be cake, chocolate, because vanilla is boring, and we should do it in the backyard because it's pretty now that Dad fixed the porch. And I should get to be the ring bearer because I'm the son, and that's an important job." Victoria nearly dropped the spatula. Daniel, who'd just walked into the kitchen with the triumphantly located library book, froze in the doorway. "Jamie," Daniel said carefully. Victoria and I haven't talked about getting married. Yes, you have. I heard you. Last week when you thought I was asleep, but I had to use the bathroom and you were talking about theoretical weddings. Theoretical means maybe real, right? Theoretical means hypothetical, Victoria corrected automatically, her mind racing. Like a possibility, not a plan. But it's a good possibility, right? Jamie looked between them with those earnest 7-year-old eyes that could cut straight through any attempt at evasion. Because you love each other and you live together, and that's what people do when they love each other and live together. They get married. Daniel sat down at the table, and Victoria could see him mentally scrambling for the right words. She sat down too, forming a triangle with Jamie at the point. You're not wrong, Daniel said finally. People who love each other often do get married, but it's a big decision, and Victoria and I need to talk about it more before we make any plans. But you want to, right? Jamie pressed. Both of you? Victoria met Daniel's eyes across the table. They danced around this conversation for weeks now, both of them feeling the pull towards something more permanent, but neither quite ready to take the leap. I would marry your dad in a heartbeat, Victoria said quietly, deciding that honesty was the only option. But it's complicated. My family has expectations. We'd need to figure out logistics. And most importantly, we'd need to make sure you were completely comfortable with it. I already said I'm comfortable. I even made a plan. Jamie pushed his drawing across the table. It was surprisingly detailed for a 7-year-old. Stick figures arranged in rows, a square that was probably an altar, elaborate squiggles that might have been flowers. See? I've been thinking about this for a while. Daniel's expression softened, and Victoria saw the exact moment he made a decision. Can you give Victoria and me a few minutes to talk? Daniel asked. Alone? Jamie's face fell. Am I in trouble? No, buddy, not at all. We just need to have a grown-up conversation, and then we'll talk to you about it. I promise. Jamie gathered his drawing reluctantly and headed toward the living room, marmalade trailing behind him like a small orange shadow. The moment he was out of earshot, Daniel turned to Victoria. He's right, Daniel said. We've been dancing around this for weeks. Maybe it's time to actually talk about it. Victoria's heart was hammering. Okay, let's talk about it. Do you want to marry me? The question was so direct, so unexpected that Victoria laughed. That's not a proposal. I know. I'm asking seriously. Do you want to marry me? Not someday, not theoretically. Actually, Victoria took a breath, letting herself feel the full weight of the question. Did she want to marry Daniel Carter? The architect with the half-finished house and the sweet son and the terrible coffee? The man who saw her as a person instead of a position, who challenged her and supported her and made her laugh even when she was exhausted? Yes, she said. I do. But Daniel, there are complications. There are always complications. Name them. My father still hasn't fully accepted this. The board will have opinions. We need to figure out prenups and legal arrangements because, like it or not, I have significant assets that need to be protected, not from you, but for legal reasons. And your business is still growing, and I don't want you to feel pressured to Victoria, Daniel interrupted gently. Those are logistics. Valid logistics, but still logistics. They're problems we can solve. What I'm asking is simpler. Do you want to spend your life with me and Jamie? Do you want to build a family with us? Do you want to take the risk that this could be forever? Tears pricked at Victoria's eyes. Yes, to all of it. Yes. Daniel stood up, pulled her to her feet, and kissed her. When they broke apart, he was smiling. Then we'll figure out the rest, he said, together. That's not a proposal either, Victoria pointed out, laughing through her tears. I know. When I propose, you'll know it. It'll be better than this. Better than a Tuesday morning in our kitchen after our 7-year-old presented us with a wedding plan? Much better, I promise. They called Jamie back into the kitchen and told him that yes, they were going to get married, but they needed some time to figure out the details. Jamie accepted this with surprising maturity, though he did make them promise that he could still be the ring bearer and that there would definitely be chocolate cake. The rest of December passed in a blur of planning and preparation. Daniel's business had hit a growth spurt, bringing in 3 new projects that would carry them through the next year. The house renovation was nearly complete. Just a few finishing touches remained. and Victoria had successfully navigated a particularly contentious board meeting where Thomas Whitmore had once again questioned her judgment, only to be shut down by her impressive quarterly results. Everything was moving forward. Everything was working, which was why Victoria should have known something would fracture. It started with a phone call on a Friday evening in mid-January. Victoria was working late at the office, reviewing contracts for a major bid, when her assistant Margaret knocked on the door. "Miss Hale, your father is here. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's urgent." Victoria felt dread settle in her stomach. Charles didn't show up unannounced unless something was seriously wrong. "Send him in." Charles entered her office, looking older than Victoria had ever seen him. His usual rigid posture was slightly stooped, his face drawn with worry. "Dad? What's wrong? Is Mom okay?" "Your mother is fine. Sit down, Victoria." "I'd rather stand." "Sit down," Charles repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. Victoria sat. Charles took the chair across from her desk, and for a long moment, he just looked at her with an expression that was equal parts disappointment and resignation. "I've been approached by Marcus Thornton," Charles said finally. Victoria's blood ran cold. Marcus Thornton was the CEO of Thornton Defense Systems, their biggest competitor. He was ruthless, ambitious, and had been trying to buy out Hale Industries for years. "And?" Victoria asked, keeping her voice steady. "He's made an offer, a substantial offer, to buy the company outright." "You told him no." "I told him I'd consider it." Victoria felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. "You can't be serious." "I'm very serious. Victoria, I'm 68 years old. I've spent 40 years building this company, and I'm tired. Your mother wants to travel. We have plans we've been putting off for decades. And Thornton's offer would let us do all of that and ensure that our employees are taken care of. Thornton doesn't care about our employees. He'll gut the company, keep the profitable contracts, and sell off everything else. You know this. He's assured me that all current employees will be retained for at least 2 years. 2 years isn't a career, Dad. It's a grace period before layoffs. You'd be selling out 3,000 people who have trusted this family for generations." Charles's expression hardened. "Don't lecture me about responsibility to our employees. I've dedicated my life to this company." "Then why are you giving up on it now?" "Because you're distracted." Charles's voice rose, the careful control finally cracking. "You're so focused on playing house with Daniel Carter that you've lost sight of what matters. The board sees it. I see it. Your judgment has been compromised." Victoria felt fury rise like a wave. "My judgment is fine. My performance reviews are excellent. Revenue is up. Employee satisfaction is up. We just won the Decker contract that everyone said was impossible. How exactly has my relationship affected my work? You're planning a wedding instead of focusing on succession planning. You're leaving the office at reasonable hours instead of putting in the 70-hour weeks this job requires. You're soft, Victoria. You've let sentiment override strategy. I've let myself have a life. There's a difference. A life that includes a ready-made family with a child who isn't yours, a man with no business connections or social standing, and a future that looks nothing like what we planned." "What you planned," Victoria corrected, standing up. "You keep saying we, but you mean you. This was always your plan, your vision, your dream. And I followed it because I wanted to make you proud. But Dad, I can run this company and have a personal life. I can be CEO and be happy. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. They are when you're trying to compete at the highest levels. Thornton has no family. He dedicates every waking hour to his company. That's what it takes to succeed. Then maybe I don't want to succeed on those terms." The words hung in the air between them, stark and irrevocable. Charles stood up slowly. "If you're not willing to make the necessary sacrifices, then perhaps it's time to let someone else run this company. Someone who won't be distracted by domestic concerns." "Are you asking me to choose between the company and Daniel?" "I'm asking you to be realistic about what this position requires. And if you can't give it your full attention, then maybe it's time to step aside." Victoria felt tears burning in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Get out." "Victoria, get out of my office. Now." Charles looked at his daughter for a long moment, then turned and left without another word. The moment the door closed, Victoria sank into her chair, shaking. She'd known her father disapproved of her relationship with Daniel, but she'd thought they'd moved past it. She'd thought that seeing her happy would be enough. She'd been wrong. Her phone rang. Daniel's name on the screen. She almost didn't answer, but she knew he'd worry if she didn't. "Hey," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Hey yourself, I'm making dinner. Well, attempting to make dinner. Jamie has informed me that my spaghetti is adequate but not exceptional. Where are you?" "Still at the office. I'm going to be late." "Everything okay? You sound off." Victoria closed her eyes. "My father is trying to sell the company." Silence on the other end of the line. Then, "I'm coming to get you." "Daniel, you don't have to." "I'm coming to get you. Don't argue. Pack up your stuff. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up before she could protest. True to his word, Daniel appeared in her office 23 minutes later, slightly out of breath like he'd run from the parking garage. He took one look at her face and crossed the room to pull her into his arms. Victoria broke. She told him everything. About Thornton's offer, about her father's ultimatum, about the accusation that she'd let her personal life compromise her professional judgment. Daniel listened without interrupting, holding her steady while she shook with anger and hurt and fear. "What are you going to do?" he asked when she finished. "I don't know. If my father sells to Thornton, 3,000 people lose their jobs. Everything my family built for 3 generations gets dismantled. But if I try to block the sale, I'm going against my father's wishes, and he'll see it as the ultimate betrayal." "Can you stop the sale? Legally?" "I'd need board support. And right now, I'm not sure I have it. My father has relationships with these people that go back decades. If he tells them this is what he wants, they might vote with him regardless of what I think." Daniel was quiet for a moment, thinking, "What if you bought the company yourself?" Victoria pulled back to look at him. "What?" "You have assets, right? Investments, savings, whatever else. What if you put together a counteroffer, buy your father out, take full ownership, remove him from the equation entirely?" "Daniel, that would require leveraging everything I have. If it failed, I'd lose everything. And even if it succeeded, my father would never forgive me. But the company would survive. The employees would keep their jobs, and you'd be in full control of your own future." Victoria's mind was already racing through the numbers, the possibilities, the risks. It was insane. It was also the only option that didn't end in either betraying her employees or sacrificing her relationship. "I'd need to talk to lawyers," she said slowly, "financial advisors. Figure out if it's even possible." "But you're considering it." "I'm considering it." Daniel cupped her face in his hands. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you. If you want to fight for the company, we'll figure it out. If you want to walk away and do something completely different, we'll figure that out too. But Victoria, don't let your father make you choose between your career and your happiness. You deserve both." "This could get really messy. My father will fight back. The board will take sides. It could drag on for months." "I know." "And you're okay with that? With the chaos and the stress and the possibility that I might lose everything trying to save this company?" Daniel smiled. "I fell in love with a woman who runs an $800 million company while learning to tile a bathroom. I'm pretty comfortable with chaos at this point." Victoria laughed despite everything, and in that moment she knew what she had to do. She was going to fight for her company. She was going to fight for her employees, and she was going to do it without sacrificing the life she'd built with Daniel and Jamie. The next morning, Victoria sat in her lawyer's office with her financial advisor and laid out her plan. It was risky, complicated, and would require leveraging nearly every asset she had. But it was possible. She would make a formal offer to buy out her father's majority stake in Hale Industries. She'd take on significant debt, but the company's strong performance meant she could secure the necessary financing. If successful, she'd become the sole owner, with full control over the company's future. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Diane Foster, listened to the proposal with growing concern. "Victoria, you understand what you're proposing, right? This isn't just a business transaction. This is a hostile takeover of your own father's company." "It's not hostile. I'm making a fair offer." "He's not going to see it that way. And if he fights back, this could get very ugly very quickly. Family disputes over business control often do." "I know, but I don't have another option. If I let him sell to Thornton, I'm betraying everyone who works for this company. If I do nothing, I'm letting him make decisions about my future without my input. This is the only way I maintain control. Diane studied her for a long moment. All right, if you're sure about this, I'll start drawing up the paperwork. But Victoria, once we file this offer, there's no going back. Your father will know you're challenging him directly. I understand. And you're prepared for the fallout? Victoria thought about Daniel's words from the night before, about deserving both her career and her happiness, about not having to choose. I'm prepared, she said. The offer was submitted to the Hale Industries Board the following Monday. By Tuesday afternoon, Victoria's phone was ringing off the hook. Board members wanting explanations, business associates expressing shock, and her father demanding to see her immediately. She met him at the house she'd grown up in, the colonial mansion where she'd spent countless hours being groomed for exactly this moment. Except she was supposed to be defending the family legacy, not fighting against it. Charles was waiting in his study, the same room where he'd made countless business decisions, where he'd taught Victoria about strategy and negotiations and the importance of family. How could you do this? He asked the moment she walked in. His voice was cold, controlled, but Victoria could see the fury beneath it. How could I save the company you built? Victoria countered. Dad, you were going to sell to Thornton. You were going to dismantle everything you spent your life creating. I was going to ensure our family's financial security and give myself the freedom to enjoy my remaining years. Instead, you've made a power play that will rip this family apart. You made the power play when you threatened to sell without consulting me. I'm just responding. By trying to buy me out? By taking control of my company? It hasn't been just your company for 2 years. I've been running it. I've been making the decisions. I've been doing the work, and I've done it well. Charles slammed his hand on the desk. You've done it well because I taught you how. Because I gave you the opportunity. Everything you have because of me. And everything you taught me, I'm using to make sure your legacy survives. Dad, if you sell to Thornton, within 5 years there won't be a Hale Industries anymore. But if you let me take over completely, I can build on what you started. I can make it bigger, stronger, more sustainable. Isn't that what you wanted? What I wanted was for you to value family loyalty over personal ambition. This isn't about ambition. This is about responsibility. To our employees, to the community, to the family name. Don't you dare lecture me about family responsibility while you're trying to force me out of the company I built. Victoria felt her composure crack. Then don't force me to choose between my work and my personal life. Don't tell me I can't be CEO and be happy. Don't make me pick between the company and Daniel because I'm not going to do it. I refuse. Then you're not the daughter I raised. The words hit like a physical blow. Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. Maybe I'm not, she said quietly. Maybe the daughter you raised would have married Elliot and played the role you designed for her and slowly disappeared into the person everyone expected her to be. But Dad, that's not who I am, and I'm done apologizing for it. She turned and walked toward the door. If you go through with this, Charles called after her, you'll lose more than the company. You'll lose your family. Victoria stopped, her hand on the doorknob. No, I'll lose you. Mom will come around eventually. She already has, actually. She's happy for me. She wants me to be happy. And if you can't see that this is what's best, for me, for the company, for everyone, then that's your failing, not mine. She left without waiting for a response. The drive home was a blur. Victoria's hands were shaking on the steering wheel, her mind replaying the conversation on an endless loop. She'd just declared war on her father. She'd just potentially destroyed her family relationship over a company and a man and a future that wasn't guaranteed. What if she was wrong? What if this was a massive mistake? She pulled into the driveway to find Daniel sitting on the front porch, clearly waiting for her. The moment he saw her face, he was on his feet. That bad? He asked as she approached. Worse. He said if I go through with the buyout, I'll lose my family. Daniel pulled her close. Then he doesn't understand what family means. Daniel, what if he's right? What if I'm choosing wrong? What if... Stop, Daniel said gently. You're not choosing wrong. You're choosing honestly. And yeah, it's hard and yeah, it hurts. But Victoria, you can't live your whole life trying to be what other people need you to be. At some point, you have to choose what you need. I need you, Victoria said, her voice breaking. I need Jamie. I need this life we've built. But I also need to know that I didn't sacrifice 3,000 people's livelihoods just to make my father happy. Then you already know what to do. Victoria pulled back to look at him. You're not worried about what this means for us? Of course I'm worried. This is going to be hard. Your father is going to fight back, the board is going to take sides, and we're probably in for months of legal battles and family drama. But Victoria, I didn't sign up for easy. I signed up for you, all of you, including the complicated family and the impossible choices and the courage it takes to stand up for what you believe in. I love you, Victoria whispered. I love you too. Now come inside. Jamie made you a sympathy card. It has 17 dinosaurs on it and says, sorry your dad is being difficult. He's very proud of it. Despite everything, Victoria laughed. They went inside together and Jamie immediately presented her with his card, which was indeed covered in dinosaurs and featured the promised message in his careful second-grade handwriting. I heard you and your dad had a fight, Jamie said seriously. That's hard, but it's okay to fight with your parents sometimes. I fight with Dad about bedtime all the time. That's different, buddy, Daniel started, but Jamie interrupted. Is it? You both want what's best for each other, but you don't agree on what that is. That's what me and Dad fight about too. He thinks bedtime at 8:30 is best. I think bedtime at never o'clock is best. Victoria found herself smiling through her tears. You're very wise, Jamie. I know. It's my best quality. He hugged her fiercely. Don't worry, Victoria. It'll be okay. And if it's not, you can live here forever anyway. We already decided you're part of the family. That night, lying in bed next to Daniel, Victoria made her final decision. She would go through with the buyout offer. She would fight for control of Hale Industries. And she would accept whatever consequences came with that choice, because the alternative, giving up on her employees, her career, and her own agency, was unacceptable. No regrets? Daniel asked, reading her mind as he often did. So many regrets, Victoria admitted. But none about this. None about us. Good. Because I'm in this with you. Whatever happens next, we face it together. The board vote was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In those 3 weeks, Victoria worked harder than she'd ever worked in her life. She met with every board member individually, presenting her vision for the company's future, outlining her financial plan, demonstrating her commitment and capability. Some were supportive. Others remained loyal to Charles. A few were genuinely undecided. The day of the vote, Victoria arrived at the Hale Industries boardroom an hour early. She'd barely slept, running through her presentation one more time, anticipating every possible objection, preparing for every contingency. Charles arrived 30 minutes before the meeting, and for a moment they stood on opposite sides of the conference room, two people who'd once been so close now separated by ambition and principle and irreconcilable visions of the future. It's not too late, Charles said quietly. You could withdraw the offer. We could find a middle ground. There is no middle ground between selling to Thornton and keeping the company independent, Victoria replied. You know that. Then I suppose we'll let the board decide. The meeting was brutal. Victoria presented her case with all the professional polish she'd spent her life developing. Charles presented his, emphasizing his years of experience, his relationship with the board, his vision for the family's future. Board members asked questions, raised concerns, debated the merits of both approaches, and then they voted. 7 votes for Victoria's buyout offer, 5 votes for Charles's plan to sell to Thornton. Victoria had won. She'd also just defeated her father in front of his oldest friends and business associates, a public humiliation he would never forget or forgive. The board members filed out slowly, some congratulating Victoria, others avoiding her eyes entirely. Charles packed up his materials with mechanical precision, his face a mask of controlled fury. Dad, Victoria started, but he held up a hand. Congratulations, Victoria. You've won. I hope it's everything you wanted it to be. He left without another word. Victoria stood alone in the empty boardroom, victorious and heartbroken, holding the company she'd fought for and wondering at what cost. Her phone buzzed, a text from Daniel. How did it go? She replied, I won. His response came immediately. Coming to get you. You shouldn't be alone right now. 20 minutes later, Daniel appeared at her office door. He didn't ask questions, didn't need details. He just held her while she cried. Tears of relief and victory and grief for the relationship with her father that might never recover. You did the right thing, he said quietly. Then why does it feel like I lost? Because sometimes the right thing costs more than we want to pay, but that doesn't make it wrong. They drove home together in silence, and Victoria thought about everything she'd gained and everything she'd sacrificed. She had the company. She had Daniel and Jamie. She had a future she'd chosen for herself, but she'd lost her father's approval, possibly forever. And as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling while Daniel slept beside her, she wondered if she'd ever stop feeling like she'd made a terrible mistake. The feeling didn't fade with morning light. Victoria woke the next day still weighted by the knowledge that she'd won her company and possibly lost her father in the process. She went through the motions of her routine: shower, coffee, reviewing emails, but everything felt hollow. Daniel watched her with quiet concern, not pushing, just present. Jamie, with the emotional radar that children sometimes possess, was unusually subdued at breakfast. "Are you sad?" he asked Victoria as she pushed scrambled eggs around her plate. "A little bit, yeah." "Because of the meeting yesterday?" Victoria glanced at Daniel, who gave a small nod. They'd agreed to be honest with Jamie about the situation, within reason. "I had to make a really hard choice," Victoria said carefully. "And even though I think it was the right choice, it hurt some people I love. That's a difficult feeling." Jamie considered this with his trademark seriousness. "My teacher says that sometimes being brave means doing things that are hard and scary. Is that what you did?" "Yeah, kiddo, that's exactly what I did." "Then I'm proud of you," Jamie declared. "Even if it's sad, I'm still proud." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, Jamie. That means a lot." After Jamie left for school, Victoria stood in the kitchen with Daniel, both of them drinking coffee and avoiding the elephant in the room. "You should call your mother," Daniel said finally. "I know. She might surprise you. Or she might tell me I've destroyed the family. Only one way to find out." Victoria pulled out her phone, stared at it for a long moment, then dialed her mother's number before she could lose her nerve. Catherine answered on the second ring. "Victoria." "Hi, Mom. I heard about the vote." Victoria braced herself. "And? And I think you did what you had to do." Catherine's voice was soft but firm. "Your father is furious, of course. He barely slept last night. But Victoria, he was wrong to try to sell the company without considering what you wanted. You've been running it successfully for 2 years. You've earned the right to decide its future." Victoria felt something loosen in her chest. "You're not angry?" "I'm sad. I hate seeing my family divided like this. But angry? No, sweetheart, I'm not angry. I'm actually rather proud of you for standing up for yourself, even when it was hard. Dad won't see it that way. Your father is a stubborn man who's used to getting his own way. This is the first time in 40 years that someone has successfully challenged him on something he cared deeply about, and that someone being his own daughter makes it even harder to accept." "Do you think he'll ever forgive me?" Catherine was quiet for a moment. "I don't know, but I know he loves you. And I know that love doesn't disappear just because you've disagreed about something important. Give him time. He needs to process this." "How much time?" "I wish I could tell you, but Victoria, in the meantime, you need to keep living your life. Don't put everything on hold waiting for your father to come around. That's not fair to you or to Daniel or to Jamie." They talked for a few more minutes before hanging up. Victoria relayed the conversation to Daniel, who looked relieved. "See? Your mother gets it." "My mother isn't the one I'm worried about." "I know, but it's a start." The following weeks were a strange blend of triumph and grief. Victoria officially took full ownership of Hale Industries, navigating the legal complexities of the buyout with her lawyer's help. She gave a press conference announcing her vision for the company's future, emphasizing her commitment to the employees and to sustainable growth. The business community's response was mixed. Some praised her bold move, others questioned whether she could handle the pressure of sole ownership. But the numbers didn't lie. Under Victoria's leadership, the company continued to thrive. She won 2 major contracts in the first month of her full ownership. Employee retention remained high. The trade publications that had initially questioned her judgment began running pieces about her innovative approach to leadership. At home, life developed a new rhythm. The house renovation was finally complete. Every room finished, every system working, the whole place transformed from a construction site into an actual home. Daniel's architecture firm was busier than ever, his reputation growing as word spread about his creative designs and attention to detail. And Jamie was thriving in second grade, his friendship with Marcus restored, his role as Victoria's extra son, as he'd started calling himself, fully embraced. But the absence of Charles Hale hung over everything like a shadow. Victoria's mother came to visit regularly, always warm and supportive. But Charles remained distant, communicating only through lawyers about the final details of the ownership transfer. He didn't return Victoria's calls. He didn't respond to her emails. He'd frozen her out completely. 2 months after the board vote, Daniel found Victoria in their bedroom late one night, staring at her phone. "What are you doing?" he asked, trying to decide if I should call my father again. "Have you called recently?" "3 times this week. He hasn't answered." Daniel sat down next to her on the bed. "Victoria, you can't force him to talk to you. He needs to come to terms with this in his own time." "What if he never does? What if I've permanently destroyed our relationship?" "Then that's his choice, not yours. You didn't do anything wrong. You made a business decision that was best for the company and its employees. If he can't see past his own hurt feelings to recognize that, that's on him." "He's my father." "I know, and that makes it harder. But Victoria, you can't live your life trying to earn approval from someone who's decided you don't deserve it. At some point, you have to accept that you did your best and let go of the outcome." Victoria leaned into him, grateful for his steady presence. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just didn't notice because you were too busy being impressed by my coffee-making skills." That got a small laugh. "Your terrible coffee-making skills. Hey now, my coffee has improved. It's gone from undrinkable to barely tolerable. I'm very proud of your progress." They settled into bed, and Victoria tried to take Daniel's advice about letting go. But the absence of her father's approval was a wound that wouldn't quite heal. March arrived with warmer weather and blooming trees. Daniel had been acting strange for about a week, secretive, distracted, occasionally disappearing to make mysterious phone calls. Victoria assumed it was work-related and didn't press. On a Saturday morning, Daniel announced that they were going out. "Where?" Victoria asked. "It's a surprise." "I don't like surprises." "You'll like this one, trust me. And dress nice but comfortable. And wear good walking shoes." Those are very cryptic instructions. "I'm a mysterious man." Jamie was in on whatever was happening, giggling and whispering with Daniel while Victoria got ready. When she came downstairs wearing a sundress and flats, both of them grinned at her. "You look perfect," Daniel said. "For what?" "You'll see." They drove through Charleston, and Victoria tried to figure out where they were going based on the route. Not downtown, not toward the beach, not toward her parents' house, thankfully. Daniel pulled up to the small park Victoria had never been to before. Nothing fancy, just a quiet green space with walking trails and old oak trees draped in Spanish moss. "We're going for a walk?" Victoria asked. "Something like that." They got out of the car, Jamie practically vibrating with excitement. Daniel took Victoria's hand and led her down one of the trails. They walked in comfortable silence, sunlight filtering through the trees, birds singing overhead. After about 10 minutes, they reached a clearing, and Victoria stopped dead. The space had been transformed. Someone had strung lights through the tree branches. There were flowers everywhere. Simple wildflowers in mason jars, nothing elaborate or formal. And standing in the middle of it all was a small group of people. Catherine Hale, Daniel's contractor friend Mike and his wife, Mrs. Chen from down the street, Margaret, Victoria's assistant, Jamie's teacher, a handful of Victoria's colleagues from work who'd become friends over the years. And in the center of the group, looking uncomfortable but present, was Charles Hale. Victoria turned to Daniel, stunned. "What is this?" Daniel dropped to one knee, and Victoria's breath caught. "Victoria Hale," he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. "I know I said I'd plan a better proposal than a Tuesday morning in our kitchen. I hope this qualifies." He opened the box to reveal a ring, not huge or ostentatious, but beautiful. A sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, elegant and understated. "I love you," Daniel continued. "I love your brilliant mind and your terrible morning mood before coffee, and the way you tackle problems like they're personal challenges. I love how you've embraced Jamie as your own son. I love that you fight for what you believe in, even when it costs you. I love building a life with you, and I want to keep building it for the rest of our lives. So, Victoria, will you marry me? Victoria was crying, nodding before she could even speak. Yes. Yes, of course, yes. Daniel slid the ring onto her finger and stood up to kiss her while their small gathering of friends and family applauded. Jamie ran over to hug them both, jumping up and down with excitement. I told you I had a good plan, he said triumphantly. When Victoria finally looked up, she saw her father standing at the edge of the group, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. Their eyes met across the clearing. Catherine gently ushered everyone else toward a nearby picnic area where, Victoria now noticed, there was food and drinks set up. Within moments, she and Charles were alone in the clearing. Hi, Dad, Victoria said quietly. Hello, Victoria. They stood there awkwardly, two people who'd once been so close now separated by months of silence and hurt. Mom said she invited you, Victoria said. I didn't know if you'd come. I almost didn't. Charles looked down at his shoes, then back at her. Your mother was very insistent. She said if I missed my daughter's engagement, she'd never forgive me. And that convinced you? That, and the fact that I've spent the last 2 months being absolutely miserable. Charles took a breath. I was wrong, Victoria. About a lot of things. Victoria felt her throat tighten. Dad, let me finish, please. Charles moved closer. I was wrong to try to sell the company without consulting you properly. I was wrong to give you an ultimatum between your career and your personal life. And I was wrong to shut you out after the board vote. You didn't betray me. You saved the company, and I was too proud and too hurt to admit that. I didn't want to hurt you, Victoria said, tears streaming down her face now. I just couldn't let you sell to Thornton. I couldn't watch everything you built get destroyed. I know, and you were right to fight me on it. The truth is, I wasn't thinking about the company or the employees. I was thinking about control, about not wanting to let go, about being terrified of what my life would look like if I wasn't running Hale Industries anymore. You could have talked to me about that. I should have, but I didn't know how to admit that I was scared, that I was tired, that I wasn't sure who I was if I wasn't the CEO. Charles smiled sadly. Turns out, letting go is harder than I thought. What changed? Why are you here now? Your mother. She's been working on me for weeks, telling me I was being a stubborn fool. And then Daniel called me. Victoria's eyes widened. Daniel called you? About 3 weeks ago. He asked to meet for coffee. I almost said no, but curiosity got the better of me. Charles shook his head with something like admiration. That man sat across from me and told me, very politely, but very firmly, that I was breaking my daughter's heart, that I was letting pride override love, and that if I didn't fix it soon, I was going to miss out on the most important parts of her life. He said that? He also said that he loved you enough to fight for your relationship with me, even though I'd been nothing but difficult and dismissive. He said you deserved to have your father at your wedding, and he was willing to do whatever it took to make that happen, including confronting me. Charles's voice roughened. He's a good man, Victoria. Better than I gave him credit for. Victoria was fully crying now. He never told me he called you. I asked him not to. I told him I needed time to think about what he'd said. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized he was right. I've been so focused on what I wanted for your life that I forgot to pay attention to what you wanted. And what you want, he gestured at the ring on her finger, at the gathering of friends beyond, at the life she'd built, is pretty damn good. Are we okay? Victoria asked, her voice small. Charles opened his arms and Victoria stepped into them. They stood there in the clearing, holding each other, two stubborn people who loved each other but had forgotten how to show it. We're okay, Charles said quietly. We're going to be okay. When they rejoined the group, Jamie immediately ran over to Charles. Did you apologize? He asked bluntly. Jamie, Daniel started, but Charles laughed. Yes, I apologized, and Victoria accepted. We're good now. Good. Because you were being pretty mean to her, and she was really sad about it. I know, and I'm very sorry about that. Jamie studied Charles with his serious 7-year-old eyes. Okay. But if you're mean to her again, I'm going to be very disappointed in you. That's fair, Charles said solemnly. I would be disappointed in me, too. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of celebration. They ate the picnic food that Daniel had somehow arranged. Catherine hugged Victoria approximately 17 times. People shared stories and laughter and congratulations. Later, as the sun started to set and people began to leave, Victoria pulled Daniel aside. "You called my father," she said. "I did. And you never told me. I wasn't sure it would work. Didn't want to get your hopes up. Daniel Carter, you are the most infuriating, wonderful, sneaky man I've ever met. I love you too." She kissed him, deep and grateful. "Thank you for this, for all of it. You deserve to be happy, Victoria. All the way happy. Not happy except for this one painful thing. You deserve everything." "I already have everything," she said, looking around at Jamie chasing fireflies, at her parents talking quietly together, at the friends who'd shown up to celebrate. "Right here." The wedding planning, when it actually began, was surprisingly simple. Victoria and Daniel had agreed. Small ceremony, close friends, and family only. Nothing elaborate or formal. Jamie's detailed plans from months ago became the actual blueprint. They'd get married in the backyard, there would be chocolate cake, and Jamie would absolutely be the ring bearer. They set the date for late April, giving them just 6 weeks to plan. Catherine threw herself into helping with the details, clearly thrilled to be included. Even Charles participated, offering suggestions with surprising enthusiasm. The night before the wedding, Victoria stayed at her parents' house, a last nod to tradition. She and Catherine sat up late in Victoria's old bedroom, talking. "Are you nervous?" Catherine asked. "Terrified," Victoria admitted. "Not about marrying Daniel. I'm absolutely sure about that, but about everything it represents, about being a wife and a stepmother and trying to balance it all with running the company." "You've been balancing it all for months now. What's different?" "The permanence, I guess. The formal commitment. The knowledge that this is it. This is my life now." Catherine smiled. "Darling, this has been your life for a while now. The wedding is just making it official. But if you're having doubts—" "I'm not," Victoria interrupted. "I'm not having doubts. I'm just processing. It's a lot of change in a short time. The best changes usually are." They talked until nearly midnight, and when Victoria finally went to sleep, she felt calm, ready. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the kind of perfect spring day that Charleston was famous for. Victoria got ready at her parents' house with her mother and Margaret, who'd become a close friend over the years. The dress was simple, ivory silk, sleeveless, fitted but not tight, elegant without being fussy. Victoria had found it on the second store they'd visited, and when she'd put it on, Catherine had started crying. "You look beautiful," Margaret said, as Victoria examined herself in the mirror. "I look terrified." "That too, but mostly beautiful." A knock on the door and Charles entered. He stopped when he saw Victoria, and his eyes immediately went bright with tears. "Oh, sweetheart," he said, "you look just like your mother did on our wedding day." I'll take that as a compliment," Catherine said, wiping her own eyes. "It's the highest compliment I can give." Charles cleared his throat. "Victoria, I know I haven't always made this easy, but I want you to know that I'm proud of you, of the woman you've become, of the choices you've made, and I'm honored to walk you down the aisle today." "Dad, you're going to make me cry and ruin my makeup." "Then I'll stop talking." But I needed to say it. They drove to Daniel's house, their house, Victoria corrected herself, where the backyard had been transformed exactly as Jamie had envisioned months ago. White chairs arranged in rows, wildflowers everywhere, a simple arch covered in ivy and blooms, and at the end of the short aisle, standing with Jamie beside him and trying very hard not to cry, was Daniel. The ceremony was brief and perfect. The officiant, a friend of Daniel's, spoke about love and partnership and building a life together. Victoria and Daniel had written their own vows, and when it was her turn to speak, Victoria looked at Daniel and let everything else fall away. "I came to your door looking for a flashlight," she said, her voice steady despite the tears running down her face. "What I found was light itself. You saw me when I'd forgotten how to see myself. You challenged me to want more, to fight for more, to believe I deserved more than the life other people had planned for me. You and Jamie have given me a family, a home, and a future I never knew I needed. I promise to build that future with you, to support your dreams, to be a partner worthy of you, and to love you completely for all the days of my life." Daniel's vows were simpler but no less powerful. He promised to love her, to see her, to stand beside her through every challenge and celebrate every triumph. He promised to share his life and his son and his terrible coffee with her forever. When the officiant pronounced them married and Daniel kissed her, the small gathering erupted in applause. Jamie cheered the loudest. The reception was exactly what they'd wanted: casual, warm, full of laughter. They ate the chocolate cake Jamie had insisted on. They danced to music from a playlist Daniel had carefully curated. Victoria's colleagues from Hale Industries mingled with Daniel's contractor friends. Catherine and Charles looked happier than Victoria had seen them in years. As the evening wound down and guests started to leave, Victoria found herself standing with Daniel at the edge of the celebration, watching Jamie show Charles his detailed wedding plan that had come true exactly like I said it would. "We did it," Daniel said quietly. "We did. We actually did it. Any regrets?" Victoria looked around at the backyard they'd built together, at the house they'd renovated, at the family they'd created from scratch. She thought about everything she'd fought for: her company, her relationship, her right to choose her own path. "Not a single one," she said. 3 months later, on a quiet evening in July, Victoria sat in her doctor's office holding Daniel's hand and trying to process what she'd just been told. "You're about 8 weeks along," the doctor said with a warm smile. "Congratulations." Victoria and Daniel looked at each other, stunned. They hadn't been trying, it hadn't even been on their radar yet. But here it was, happening anyway. "Are you sure?" Victoria asked. "Very sure. Everything looks healthy. We'll want to schedule regular checkups, of course, but for now, congratulations to both of you." They walked out of the office in a daze, climbed into the car, and just sat there for a long moment. "We're having a baby," Daniel said finally. "We're having a baby," Victoria repeated, testing the words. "How do you feel about that?" Victoria did a quick internal assessment. She was terrified. She was thrilled. She was completely unprepared. She was more ready than she'd ever been. "I feel like our lives just got even more complicated," she said. And I wouldn't change it for anything." They told Jamie that evening, and his reaction was everything they could have hoped for. "I'm going to be a big brother?" he asked, eyes wide. "You are," Victoria confirmed. "Like a real big brother? With a real baby?" "A real baby." Jamie processed this for approximately 3 seconds before launching into a detailed plan for teaching his future sibling about dinosaurs and how to catch orange cats and the importance of chocolate cake. They told their families a few days later. Catherine cried happy tears. Charles looked simultaneously thrilled and slightly terrified, which Victoria found oddly endearing. "A grandchild," he said wonderingly. "We're going to have another grandchild." "You're going to be a grandfather again," Victoria corrected gently. "Jamie counts." Charles looked at Jamie, who was explaining to Catherine why Ankylosaurus would definitely beat a T-Rex in a fight, and his expression softened. "You're right," Charles said. "I am. And I'm going to do better with this one. With both of them." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Victoria worked through her first trimester, then her second, only cutting back her hours slightly as she entered her third. She'd hired a strong executive team at Hale Industries, people she trusted to help carry the load. The company continued to thrive. Daniel's business was busier than ever, but he turned down projects that would have required extensive travel. His priority was being present for Victoria and Jamie and the baby who would arrive in February. On a cold night in late January, Victoria went into labor 3 weeks early. Daniel drove her to the hospital with Jamie in the back seat, both of them trying very hard to stay calm while Victoria breathed through contractions. "I'm not ready," Victoria said as they pulled into the hospital parking lot. "Yes, you are," Daniel said firmly. "You're the most capable person I know. You're absolutely ready for this." "I haven't finished the nursery. I haven't read all the baby books. I haven't—" "Victoria, breathe. We've got this. Together." The labor was long and intense, but Victoria was surrounded by support. Daniel never left her side. Catherine arrived shortly after they did and paced the waiting room with Charles and Jamie. The nursing staff was kind and encouraging, and at 3:47 a.m. on February 3rd, Grace Catherine Carter entered the world crying loudly and demanding attention. "She's perfect," Daniel said, tears streaming down his face as he held his daughter for the first time. "She's tiny," Victoria said, exhausted and overwhelmed and completely in love. She's perfect, Daniel repeated. They brought Jamie in to meet his sister a few hours later. He approached the hospital bed cautiously, eyes wide as he looked at the small bundle in Victoria's arms. "That's her?" he whispered. "That's her. This is your sister Grace. She's really small. She'll get bigger." Jamie studied Grace for a long moment. Then he gently touched her tiny hand and her fingers immediately curled around his. "Hi, Grace," he said softly. "I'm Jamie. I'm your big brother. I'm going to teach you about dinosaurs and stuff. It's going to be awesome." Victoria felt tears streaming down her face as she watched her two children meet for the first time. Daniel wrapped his arms around all of them, and Victoria thought about how far they'd come. A year ago, she'd been fighting for her company, estranged from her father, terrified about her future. Now she had everything she'd never known she wanted: a husband who saw her completely, a son who'd chosen to love her, a daughter who'd just arrived, and a family that was complicated and imperfect and absolutely hers. Catherine and Charles came in next, and the sight of her father holding his new granddaughter with tears running down his face made Victoria cry all over again. "She's beautiful, Victoria," Charles said. "Just perfect." "Thanks, Dad." "And you did amazingly. I'm so proud of you." They stayed in the hospital for 2 days before bringing Grace home. The house that Daniel had been renovating when they first met was now full. 2 children, 2 adults, 1 cat, and more love than Victoria had ever thought possible. The first weeks were chaos. Grace cried at all hours. Victoria struggled with breastfeeding and sleep deprivation. Daniel walked endless circles around the house with his daughter at 3 a.m., singing off-key lullabies. Jamie tried to help by reading Grace elaborate stories about dinosaurs, which she slept through completely. But slowly, they found their rhythm. Victoria took maternity leave from Hale Industries, trusting her executive team to handle things in her absence. Daniel worked from home when possible, splitting his time between client meetings and diaper changes. Jamie embraced his role as big brother with endearing seriousness. And one evening in early spring, when Grace was 2 months old and finally sleeping for more than 2 hours at a stretch, Victoria found herself standing in the doorway of the nursery watching Daniel rock their daughter to sleep. He looked up and saw her watching and smiled. "Hey," he whispered. "Hey yourself." "She's almost out." "Good, I'm exhausted." "Me too." They stood there in the soft glow of the nightlight, 2 tired parents savoring a moment of peace. "Remember when you knocked on my door looking for a flashlight?" Daniel asked quietly. "Best lost flashlight in history. I knew I liked you from that first conversation, the way you looked at my renovation disaster and didn't run screaming." "I almost did run screaming. Your coffee was that bad." "It's improved." "Marginally." Daniel carefully transferred Grace to her crib, and they stood watching her sleep for a moment before heading to their own bedroom. "Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if you hadn't knocked that night?" Daniel asked as they settled into bed. "Sometimes, but not in a wistful way. More in a grateful way, like, what if I hadn't been brave enough to knock? What if I'd stayed in my perfect lonely house and never taken the risk? I'm glad you took the risk." "Me too." They fell asleep tangled together, and Victoria thought about risks and rewards and the courage it took to choose the life you wanted instead of the life everyone expected. 6 months later, on a warm September evening, Victoria stood in the backyard hosting a small gathering. It wasn't anything formal, just friends and family, a casual dinner to celebrate the fact that Hale Industries had just won the biggest contract in company history. Daniel was manning the grill with Jamie as his assistant. Grace was being passed around by various admirers, charming everyone with her gummy smiles. Catherine and Charles were deep in conversation with some of Victoria's colleagues. Mrs. Chen was giving unsolicited but appreciated advice about baby sleep schedules. Victoria's assistant Margaret appeared at her elbow with a glass of wine. "To the CEO who does it all," Margaret said, raising her own glass. "I definitely don't do it all," Victoria protested. "I have an amazing team and an incredibly supportive family." "Still, this is a big win. You should take a moment to appreciate it." Victoria looked around at her backyard full of people she loved, at the house she'd helped build, at the family she'd chosen and the family that had chosen her back. "I'm appreciating it," she said. "All of it. All Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and the kids were in bed, Victoria and Daniel sat on their back porch watching fireflies. "I've been thinking," Victoria said. "Dangerous." "Very." She smiled. "I've been thinking about succession planning for the company." "You just won your biggest contract ever and you're already thinking about succession?" "Not immediate succession, long-term planning. I want to build something sustainable, something that will last beyond me. And I want to make sure that when the time comes, the company goes to someone who will preserve its values and protect the employees." "You've got years before you need to worry about that." "I know, but I like planning ahead. It's kind of my thing." Daniel pulled her closer. "Your thing is taking on impossible challenges and making them work through sheer force of will." "That too." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from truly knowing someone. "Daniel?" Victoria said after a while. "Yeah?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For knocking me out of the life I thought I was supposed to have and showing me the life I actually wanted. For being patient while I figured it all out. For fighting for me, even when it meant confronting my father. For building this with me." Daniel kissed her forehead. "Best thing I ever did was buy this broken-down house next to yours. Best thing I ever did was knock on your door. Even though you never found that flashlight, I found something better." They stayed on the porch until the fireflies faded and the stars came out. Two people who'd started as strangers and become everything to each other. Inside the house, Jamie slept peacefully with marmalade curled at his feet. Grace dozed in her crib, tiny fists curled against her cheeks. The renovation that had brought Daniel and Victoria together was long finished, but the building continued. A life, a family, a future, constructed one choice at a time. And in the morning, they'd wake up and do it all again. The meetings and the client calls and the diaper changes and the homework help and the million small moments that made up a life. But for now, in this quiet moment on their back porch, Victoria and Daniel simply held each other and appreciated what they'd built. Not the life anyone had planned for them, not the future that had seemed inevitable or expected or safe, but the life they'd chosen. Their life. And it was more than enough. It was everything.